What was the weirdest black market in your school? Mountain Dew and Pepsi had a contest where college names were printed on the inside of the bottle caps. If that school won the NCAA March Madness tournament, you could send it in for the jersey of your choice from any school. Suddenly, the black market for caps with blue-chip schools was born. I remember selling a Duke cap for $10, then turning around and buying 10 drinks from the vending machine. This one girl forged excuse notes if you brought her something one of your parents wrote. I never used her services myself, but we were and still are good friends, and I've got to say, she's really talented. I literally can't tell which one is mine after she copied something I wrote, including the signature. It's baffling. Our middle school tried to start a reward program. It turned out to be a failure of epic proportions. Wolf Bucks, named after our mascot. They were mini-sized dollars, color-coded by value. Green was $1, red was $5, blue was $10, and a gold wolf buck, only accessible to the principal and assistant principal, was $50. Now the school bought erasers, pencils, notebooks, and you could only buy them with wolf bucks. One pencil was one wolf buck. The first failure? It was very easy to copy. So kids started mass copying them. Okay, so the school got smart and said, only accepting wolf bucks with your name and your teacher's signature on it. Their second failure was keeping the same color, so kids would earn one legitimately and then the forgery started. And the third failure? Hyperinflation during pep rallies, where the principal started throwing golden wolf bucks. Eventually, the school stopped resupplying the store. Everyone had hundreds or thousands of worthless wolf bucks. Harry Potter books. I went to a religious school where books that had magic or fantasy were banned. Parents of these kids were just as religious, so kids couldn't get them from their parents. My mum didn't care, and she let me buy a few for some friends, and then more kids started requesting them. I charged double what they were worth, and kids were more than happy to pay. Most popular requests were Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Cirque du Freak series. It just goes to show that prohibiting creates an intense demand, and people willing to take risks potentially make a lot of money. I'll bet most of the teachers didn't care anyway. This happened in Los Angeles in the mid-80s. Student bus passes had to be purchased by the 5th day of the month, or you were stuck having to pay daily. The date had passed, so I found a guy in my high school willing to trade another student's pass which he'd stolen. I traded a tangerine and half a pack of cigarettes for a copy of Penthouse. Then I traded that issue with a pizza from the cafeteria for the bus pass. This wasn't a weird one, but a genius one for a tween. A girl set up a little business out of a box of stationery, writing forged letters from parents. She had all different paper, pens, and pencils of every kind, and could write in convincingly accurate tones for the content of the notes, depending on which kid they were used for. She even used different styles of handwriting and different styles of punctuation and language, too. She'd even fudged the spelling if she thought the kid's parents weren't great at it. She grew up to be incredibly educated. I look back and see that as her first moment of evil genius. It definitely suggested she'd go on to brilliance one day, and she did. In early elementary school, we had a market for mud. Different groups of kids would claim areas around the school as their mud pit and put their brand of mud in Ziploc bags to be traded with other groups for different bags of mud. We were the clay mud group, and I had about 3 kids in the muck scooping it into bags or running it to the water fountain to get fresh water to make more mud on dry days. I'd be the one to go make the deals with the other groups. We traded a lot with the gravel mud group because clay mud and cement mud are both good for building or something like that. Who knows? It made so much more sense at the time. The principal and staff eventually stepped in to end it because all of the kids came back to class filthy every day and giant holes littered every field and playground. One of my friends sold Starburst from his locker. 10 cents for 2 pieces. If he likes you, you got 2 from the normal bag. If he didn't like you, you got 2 from the bag that only had yellows. I had a friend that used to bring a bunch of Coke cans from home and then sell them for $1 at lunch. Cheaper than the vending machine prices, so it became a bit like a little business. He eventually saved up enough for a longboard. A teacher at my high school that I refused to rat on would take money from students and buy them lottery tickets or scratch-offs in exchange for a cut of any prize, $50 and up. I think the guy legit made a few $1,000s off this just during my senior year, and it made the students love him. Salt. My school canteen doesn't have any salt with chips, or fries to you Americans, and people used to sell salt packets. The most expensive offer I could find was 50 pence for a packet or £1 for 3. Diddle paper. It's coloured paper with a mouse drawn on it, but everyone collected them, no matter how old, and there were hundreds of different artworks. People had folders with protective covers, and depending on the motive and rarity you wanted to trade, you could get 3 to 4 others in exchange. It was wild. I just googled it and there are still collectors buying and selling them on the internet. Our elementary school utilized ice cream tickets. You got one if it was your birthday or if you did something that a teacher thought was exemplary. People would pass them around asking for favors down the line. Some kid found the paper used to make the tickets and Xeroxed multiple pages of the tickets. He became our kingpin and ruled us for a couple of years. I think I was 16 when this happened, but basically a bunch of guys began printing paper that looked like contracts with the top saying soul contract. They came up to some of the younger students and got them to sign the document to sell their soul for eternity, and would pay them $2 to $3. We had a good laugh when some of the students became worried they actually sold their soul. Our school did this too. The kids who regretted it had to buy their souls back at a 50% markup. Noah still has my soul. I never bought it back. Noodle seasoning packets. My best friend, at 11 years old, found out that the dumpster behind the video store had a lot of sample tapes for adult films. Basically, it was like the best parts of 4 different adult movies clipped down and put into one VHS to try and sell those videos to the store. And then it would have, "This is a sample copy," flashing on the screen, but like, you still got hardcore stuff, and all of the bits for which an 11-year-old were way more than we could handle anyway. We'd sneak up there in the middle of the night and steal a bunch of the tapes and sell them for $5 to $10 a piece. We made several $100s. I built a PC and put a CD burner in it with my share of the money. It might have also paid for a bike, but I might have mowed lawns for that. I forget which year it happened in and if they were the same summer. This wasn't in school, but yeah, I was distributing hardcore adult films to a bunch of 11-year-olds. Finally, our ring got busted and my friend got his butt beat when he fell asleep with the VHSs in his TV that rewinds and plays it automatically. His mum came to wake him up and there was that on the TV. He had to unveil his stash space. To be fair, the guy kept his mouth shut, didn't rat me out and said it was just for him. He didn't tell her it was a business we were running. We kind of had a history of this. One summer when we were like 6, we started freezing soda into an ice cube tray because it was yummy and made our extremely meager soda allowance last much longer while we were playing Sega. Well, some kids around the neighborhood wanted some, but we didn't really want to give them up. We decided to sell them for $0.25, but all of our soda pops got bought up. But by then we had enough money for several 2 liters. Well, the next day we made a bunch more and kids were rabid for them. We did 2 batches of every ice cube tray we had, and upped it to 50 cents a cube. Next day we went to $1 a cube with special mixes, $1.50 for a Surge cube, enough to buy an entire 2-liter bottle at the time, and, well, by the time parents were getting home from work, our racket got shut down. Parents were angry. We made bank. Certainly over $100 on the 3-day racket, and all of this as kindergarten-aged kids. The parents wanted the money back, but we said we spent it all. We were big fricking liars. I mean, we had plans for all the money, sure, and we spent a lot of it. We had huge bags of soda and chips stuffed in a stairwell where our parents wouldn't find it. Man, we had a great summer that year. Wait, these kids were like mafia smugglers from the age of 6? Man, you guys were born for this. You're either in prison or you're running companies of your own with that sort of cutthroat attitude and enterprise. Impressive, if not commendable. One day, my high school decided to stop selling soda because they were trying to pass some sort of audit. The very next day, my friend and I showed up with cases of cold soda in our backpacks, selling them for 50 cents apiece. We were sold out by lunchtime every day for about 2 weeks until they plugged the vending machines back in. I wouldn't say ours was weird, but my friend in high school had like a prepper granddad waiting for Y2K, and he literally had crates filled with cartons of off-brand cigarettes. So my friend would steal a few cartons, bring them to me, and I'd sell them out of my locker. I'd charge $3 a pack, and he'd get $1 and I'd get the other 2, or 50 cents for loose cigarettes, and we'd just split that down the middle. I only kept like 6 packs in a pencil case, 5 whole and 1 open for the loose ones to sell, in my locker at a time. He'd have the rest in his locker at the other end of school, and I'd just go refill as needed between classes for lunch. One time, a teacher called the cops because I was acting shady. They pulled me out of class and brought in a drug dog to search my locker. I'd just sold my last Lucy and pack like 10 minutes before that. The dog didn't find anything, but the cops went through everything, and when they opened the pencil box, there were little shreds of tobacco inside. He asked what it was, and I said, "Well, it's a pencil box, I'd guess it's probably pencil shavings." And he just kind of shrugged and put it back. I went right on back to selling cigarettes the next day. Oh, I'd also trade one Lucy for a meal ticket, which is how our lunch system worked, and I'd sell the meal tickets for $1 each and split that with my buddy as well. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Bottle caps. I still don't get it, but back in primary school, they were collecting bottle caps for some kind of charity. Google it, it's still going on around the world. So what happened was everything was going well, the teacher got everyone excited about it, and the kids were collecting it en masse. Kids would go around raiding for it, from the trash, from their school lunches, from their homes even. A teacher got a call from a concerned parent because her kid hijacked all of the bottle caps from their kitchen. So that's stage 1 of the weirdness. It's what happened afterwards. Stage 2, kids start trading with those plastic bottle caps. We'd trade pens, homework, even Pokemon cards for bottle caps. Worthless bottle caps. There wasn't even a prize for whoever could collect the most caps, it just became a currency out of nowhere. Let's talk about stage 3 of this madness. Theft. There was no bank of bot caps at our school. There was the donation box and there were your cubbies. Those who didn't want to lug their stash back home every day left it in their cubbies, and some kid decided to steal people's caps from the donation box. The great theft of Class 3B. But it was probably for the best because overnight the madness subsided. The teacher ended the bottle cap donation. She was sick of the bugs that were gathering and licking up the dried sugar juices from the caps anyway, but mostly horrified at how her little charity drive devolved into a socio-economical experiment. So just like that, the bottle cap market crashed. We did a weird assignment for a month where we ran a society for an hour each day in our classroom. People had little shops they ran from their desks, they were elected positions, laws you could be ticketed for breaking, etc. It was all run on fake money, of course. I got elected chief of police and handed out tickets for stuff like chewing gum in class. But a combination of laziness and not wanting everyone to hate me caused me to slack off, and I got fired after 2 weeks. So I opened a shop instead and sold stuff, including gum, which in hindsight makes me like a cop who becomes a substance dealer. The final week of this rolls around and there was an announcement. At the end, all of your money will be tallied up, any debts or taxes you owe subtracted, and any kid who wound up with a positive amount gets a pizza party. Kids who are in the red have to write an assignment on how and why they screwed up. This electrifies the class. Missing out on a pizza party is a big deal when you're 10, and well under half the class is currently in the black. Tons of them have taken out big loans in the beginning to set up businesses and had no way to repay them. Not me though, as I'd been receiving a salary as a cop, and after being fired, I just used the money I'd accumulated to set up shop and had no debts. Few in the class could say that, so I was sitting pretty. Soon I started receiving offers of real money on the playground for some of my fake money. You only needed to be $1 over zero to win, so I could spare plenty. I made about $40 in actual cash. I think I charged $5 for 100 fake dollars and I got 8 people to accept. So I was a corrupt cop who became a substance dealer who became a money launderer. And I won. So I definitely learned a lot about how society works. I organized the black market. My school banned Pokemon cards, so I made a new game with paper cards. I was drawing pretty well, so I folded a paper in 9, made pieces approximately the size of a Pokemon card, and created a whole new game out of this. I sold boosters for 10 cents. Spent all of my afternoons drawing cards for the school. Teachers eventually heard of it and couldn't ban it because it was still officially me distributing things. Then I started to do replicas of Pokemon cards. Like people had to show me the proof after school that they owned the card. I made a replica, and then the whole Pokemon card trading continued with paper replicas. Then after school, people made the real exchanges based on what replicas they exchanged during school. I used to sell bags of sugar and Kool-Aid, like bootleg lick'em sticks. Also sold red-hot toothpicks I made from cinnamon oil. When I got into high school, my family was one of the first to get a computer. I made a killing from printing out fake report cards. I was quite the entrepreneurial little bag of crap. Again, I wonder whether the kids who feature in these stories are just thugs capitalizing on a market, or whether this drive and entrepreneurship were the signs of early genius of some sort. There's probably a bit of each in varying levels scattered through these stories, I guess. In Year 10, I was able to gain access to a teacher's account on my school tablet, which allowed me to get internet access. I then realized I could open a hotspot, which allowed other students to have internet access on their tablets. All of this was necessary because we weren't allowed to have cell phones. I decided to charge $10 a week for each student that wanted to subscribe for internet access, which I was distributing. I started receiving requests from students not in the radius of the hotspot, and thus I figured out a way for users to SSH connect to my school tablet and use it to gain internet access. It was a mess, and the network became too slow, but I was still getting paid regardless. Best of all, the IT guy knew what I was doing, but he couldn't stop it since the school only employed one person to handle everything, and thus he was too busy to do anything about it. Drawings. It started out as a joke. Some kids make beautiful drawings and trade them for other drawings. At one point, we decided to give them a value. If a drawing was really pretty, let's say 8 out of 10, we'd number it with 8, and you could trade it for 2 4s. There were kids that wouldn't draw but were chosen to rate these drawings. At one point, kids would trade snacks for beautiful drawings. This started in my class, and in a couple of days, the whole school was doing it. My drawings were okay, but not great, and sadly, I never got snacks to bring to school, so I had nothing to trade. So I decided to recruit other kids that were really good and would be their manager, so they had more time to draw. I had siblings in other grades, so I'd contact them to trade these in their class so there was more ground to collect snacks from. I also bargained with the kids that would rate the drawings, promising them a share of the snacks. My clients would share their snacks with me as a payment for my services. I still remember those stupid horse flower drawings. Horse girls went nuts over these and would give anything for them. In high school, I was the only kid in my year who knew how to download music to your phone. I'd make a list of songs people wanted and would transfer these through Bluetooth. I'd charge 1 cookie for 1 song. There was a tree at one end of the playground that had loads of small jade rocks underneath. We had a full mining operation using stones as spades to find them. Not really black market, but kind of. It was in the 90s and most people had a computer, but internet was still very slow when you had it. I was a teen and had managed to get my hands on a CD-ROM with 3 adult videos on it. The kind of CD-ROM that was offered with the magazine you could find on the highest shelf of the newspaper stand. I was starting to know all 3 videos by heart, so I decided to lend it to a friend, and then I kind of forgot about it. A few days later, I noticed that during class, another unrelated person was lending my video to yet another guy. My CD-ROM was having a life of its own, moving from hand to hand, providing happiness along its way. I was very proud. There was a black market at my school for leaves and feathers that were deemed to be cool. People would genuinely pay 2 New Zealand bucks for a frickin' leaf. Looking back at it, it's actually kind of funny. Spicy sweet chili Doritos. This one kid would buy every single bag out of the vending machines and sell them for like double the cost. I ran a black market in my school. You remember Columbia House, where you could get 10 VHS movies for like 99 cents, but then you had to buy 5 more at a regular price? Well, I did the math and figured out what the actual price per videotape was after all commitments to the club were made, and it was like $5. So I took orders from classmates, bought movies for them, and then sold them at a slight markup. Basically, I was undercutting Suncoast. Pogs, back in the 90s. Sure, you could easily trade your standard, commercial Pogs out in the open. We'd do it before and after class. Teachers and administrators didn't care. "Oh look, it's got Simba on it, cute," I remember one of them saying. But there was a darker, more interesting trading game afoot, lurking in the boys' bathroom mid-class. The kind that, if found, would easily get you detention or possibly even suspension. Doom Pogs. Doom Pogs were awful and awesome all at once. Circular cutouts from old adult magazines, gory grossness from Fangoria, creatively illustrated preteen brilliance like, and the narrator has switched out the words here, F-Master and Miss Alford's hoo-ha. This last word was written in marker over the picture of a cat. These were just some of the devilishly deviant 7th grade wares you could find during emergency bathroom trips during 3rd and 5th period. It was quite a sight. And then, just as quickly as it began, it all came crashing down. Not because of a slip-up by any one student. No, what killed the doompog trade in our school was the sudden bursting in of the vice principal, who had to go number 2 real bad and just couldn't hold it till he got to the teacher's bathroom in the office. And there we were, caught red-handed. I wish I could say it was Madonna's chest glued over top of a yin-yang symbol that did us in that day, but the truth is it was our own hubris and greed. And with that, the great doompog trade died. Or so they thought. Some girl was in a multi-level marketing scheme and was trying to sell us perfumes. I'd say this was tragic, but maybe school was exactly the right time to fall for crappy pyramid schemes. After graduating, not so much. Sharpened sticks. When we learned about cavemen, we decided that it would be a great idea to create our own prehistoric clan, so we smashed rocks and used them to sharpen tree branches. Some of us were particularly keen on sharpening and started to use walls as grindstones. They were able to sharpen about 6 sticks in half an hour and started exchanging them for berries during recess.
Those who went to a private school, what was the best rich kid meltdown you witnessed? I know a guy who didn't get into a college he really wanted to go to. Instead of accepting it, his parents spent millions to pay for a wing of a new building to be built. And after that, the college accepted him. He still had to pay full tuition after that too, $60K per year. My mom works at a prep school that I went to. Important to this story is the snowstorm that had been forecasted all week. As I'm putting together my bag of ski stuff in her office, her richest student showed up at the door. This kid is a billionaire, with a B, also sobbing his eyes out, like my leg is broken or my dog had just died crying. The problem was his dad's helicopter was grounded in New York City and not allowed to make the flight to their private jet in Teterboro, New Jersey. Instead, his dad would have to rent a limo to take him to a hotel in the area. This was delaying his trip to Belize or Cancun and meant that he wouldn't get to start getting wasted for another 3 hours or so. And he was just so stressed. I was going to a normal public high school at the time. There was this girl in a youth group I was in who put everyone else down. She would go on and on about how much her parents loved her and how they loved her so much that she got to go to a fancy private school. She would really rub it in, too. Not having a good day, grades not so good, sick day. Well, if only your parents loved you enough to send you to a private school like mine do. It was annoying and hurtful to everyone. Well, one day I'm walking down the hall to my next class and I see the principal introducing a new student to the teacher. It was none other than this girl. Her folks must have gotten sick of her attitude and decided they needed to put her back into public school for an attitude adjustment. It sounds like this girl needed to be humbled a little. This was probably the right decision parentally. A bit of backstory, Sao Paulo has really crappy traffic, and rush hour is just miserable. Hours to go a few miles. So this girl who used to be nicer when she was younger became a total witch in high school. One day, her driver picked her up in the wrong car. It wasn't the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, but a mere normal car. She completely ignored him, refused to acknowledge he was there or waiting for her to get in the car. So that poor guy had to drive back to her house without her in the crappiest traffic imaginable to get the Benz. Drive back in the crappiest traffic imaginable to pick up a spoiled brat who started yelling at him for being incredibly late. I'm 100% sure he didn't drive the Benz in the first place because her dad forbade the driver from taking it. Ugh, God, I really do feel bad for that guy. I can't imagine having to put up with a child like that. I went to a boarding school in the late 90s, and I remember a girl in my Spanish class trying, unsuccessfully but at great length, to argue her way out of a tardy because Daddy's secretary forgot to call and wake me up this morning. Do private colleges count? If so, there was a rich girl from LA who went to my college and demanded a private apartment in one of the dorm buildings because she didn't want roommates. Shortly after, she decided she didn't want to stay in the dorms at all and had her parents rent her a house that was $7,500 a month. This was in San Francisco, so I'm pretty sure most of you can imagine how expensive things can be. I went to an expensive private school on a scholarship and was friends with this girl Samantha, whose mom had security cameras in every room of the house and would constantly spy on her. Also had monitoring programs on the computer, the whole 9 yards. My parents mentioned this to me once, and being a stupid kid, I told Samantha. The mom flipped her lid. I'm talking calling my parents several times a day to berate them, to the point where they had to block her number. I was never allowed over to her house again. Samantha and her friends bullied me relentlessly for the rest of the year. It was pretty traumatic, honestly. I didn't understand what was going on, because I thought I was doing the right thing by telling her. This one doesn't feel fair to our original poster. They were just trying to give you a heads up that you're being spied on. For all of that to blow back in your face like that kind of leaves you not wanting to help people again in the future. I went to boarding school for 2 years. I was on a scholarship and most of the other girls were trust fund babies. They'd go skiing in Europe. Every week, they'd go on shopping sprees at the mall and make room in their closets by throwing out brand new, still with tags outfits. I didn't have money to go shopping, but I loved those days because I could pick through the new clothes in the trash cans and find beautiful things for me and my sister. One day, one of the snottier rich girls found me looking through the garbage and said some horrible things about how I was a trash picker, poor, and other stuff I've blocked out. I hid from class for 2 days because I was so embarrassed. A few months later, I was in the study hall late at night. Going back through the hallways to my room, I heard her sobbing in the hall. I almost walked right by, but I felt really bad for her. I stopped to ask her what was wrong, and she blurted out that her parents were divorcing. Then she realized who I was and started getting all rude. I gave her some Kleenex from my bag and told her I was sorry that was happening to her. Then I walked away. She wasn't super nice to me ever, but I think she got a little bit nicer after that, especially when her buddies weren't around. Honestly, it sounds like they're the stupid ones. You were getting brand new clothes for free. Let them call you all the names you want. You're getting high-end stuff for free? I'm not gonna complain. I went to an all-women's private college. My second-year roommate was a disaster. Screamed on the phone as loud as possible with her parents if they didn't send her $5,000 a week. She wanted a new snowboard and had spent her $5,000 on going out and God knows what. She had a total meltdown in the hallway of the dorm, screaming that her parents didn't really care about her. I can't impress upon you how loud she was screaming. I was like, if I could get $50 a month, I was thrilled. But my parents never sent me money ever. How are you blowing through $5,000 a week? And even with that incredibly generous allowance, you still call and ask for more money instead of waiting until next week? Not exactly a meltdown, but a behavior issue. This kid was the senator's son, and in my history class behind me, he always acted entitled, and the teacher even praised his father like he was God. We get our test grades back, and he happens to see that I got a really good grade. For some reason, as we were passing our tests up the row for the teacher to recollect, he says, "Pick these up by yourself, nerd," and throws them all across the floor in front of me. This was in high school. I hadn't witnessed such a cheap way of bullying since elementary school. Ugh, this kid really just sounds like he plays up to all the stereotypes. My mom was an English teacher at a private school that I also went to, but her stories always seemed to be more intense than mine. Once, she was teaching a particularly badly behaved class, trying to get them to keep quiet and do the assigned work. This one stubborn kid decided that the best response was to say, "Why should I have to listen to you? My parents pay your salary." She flipped her lid and that kid barely spoke for the rest of the year. This isn't from me, but my mom, who was a teacher at a private school. Just prepare yourself. So for this kid's 18th birthday, he gets this sweet red Porsche, which he drives to school. He doesn't need it to drive to school because he lives literally a 30-second walk away on the estate where the houses start at about £3 million each. But he does it anyway because he's a tool. Because this beautiful car must not be forced to mingle with the commoner cars of the other 6th form students, he's given permission to park it in the staff car park, which is still commoner cars but on a secured lot. Around a week later, he's showing off to his friends by fooling around in his car in the staff car park. and slams the passenger side of his car into the back of a staff car. The staff car is an old Jeep from the 90s, so it's not the least bit disturbed or dented from having a sports car wrapped around it. No one was in the passenger side, and the driver was fine, but the car itself looked like a really expensive boomerang. Of course, the kid starts screaming and crying and complaining, threatening all sorts of legal action. My mom was his head of year at the time, so he comes running to her demanding something be done. But she does everything but outright laugh in his face and tells him he's on his own. The next day, my mom comes into work and some very irate and powerful parents are waiting in her office, demanding to know why the school wasn't doing anything about the fact a staff member had crashed into their son's car, and threatening to press criminal charges if the school didn't pay up. The kid's there with a massive grin on his face, but this isn't my mother's first rodeo. Oh no, she's prepared. Oh? Well, that's not what the staff member said happened. Let's review the CCTV, shall we? Obviously, the kid is now bricking it, and the parents agree to watch, knowing they'll be vindicated. Of course, it shows the kid donutting around in his car before smashing into the Jeep. The parents slowly turn to the kid. The kid starts ranting and raving. Honest to God, full breakdown. My mom was worried an ambulance would have to be called to commit this child. Eventually, the parents agreed to pay for any damages to the staff's car. The kid got a new car, but it was something like a third-hand Ford Ka, and he wasn't allowed to drive it to school anymore. It got even better when the next year, his brother came into the 6th form and got a sweet ride, and told my mom that that original jerk had been banned from driving it, as well as the parents' new cars, after he also crashed his Ka. This is a perfect example of why you don't get your kids this age stuff that's very expensive. At the end of the day, they just end up ruining it. I'm sorry, you can't be trusted. We know you want to show off to your friends, but you can do that in a Ford. You don't need to do it in an expensive Porsche. I briefly attended a private school for about 3 years. A girl that had been going there since kindergarten received a low grade on a Spanish test and went off on the teacher about it. She got her parents involved in everything and ended up transferring schools because the teacher wouldn't adjust her grade. Is that really worth all the trouble involved? Like, spend an extra night studying Spanish. You'll be fine. I went to a normal high school, but I remember there was a rich girl that lost it one day because one of her nails broke on her manicured hand, and she called her mom to come get her so she could get it fixed immediately. The school was okay with it because they didn't want to hear her whining about it anymore. It wasn't a private school, rather a public school in a very wealthy town. We really did have the best of everything at my school. My family's fairly wealthy. Some of the kids I grew up with, though, were heirs to vast fortunes. Insurance, DuPont, sports empires, etc. I was sitting in the lobby at my high school. This girl had just gotten the ultra-exclusive Dolce & Gabbana Motorola Razr. She was going on and on about how exclusive it was. This other girl rounds the corner and was like, "Oh my god, I just got the same phone." The first girl looked like she was gonna choke her out. She got the girl to hand her her phone and said, "Poor girls like you don't deserve fashion accessories like this," and snapped her phone in half. The other girl took it unbelievably well. I actually became friends with her after that. Turns out that she was not poor at all. Her mother was one of the heirs to the Sears fortune, and her father was a bigwig at Motorola. The best part is that she got her father to give her 50 of these stupid gold Dolce & Gabbana phones, and handed them out a few days later to a bunch of kids at school. I still have mine somewhere in the box. I appreciated the gift, but never used it. Shout out to the girl who single-handedly ripped the exclusivity of this phone out of this school. My sister cried as she got a laptop for Christmas. For the previous year, she wanted a laptop, but for this, she only wanted clothes. It was made better when my mom opened a "I love my rotten, ungrateful children" fridge magnet after my sister went upstairs. Currently in a very wealthy private school in Manhattan. Many are wealthy, and many aren't who are on financial aid, but culture in the school is to be pretty humble about wealth. A girl that actually just moved here was telling me about her $50 million trust fund and her daddy's private plane. She picks up her phone and I see a text from her mom. I look over and see what appears to be a long apology from her mom about something. I ask her what she's apologizing for. The girl explains that she went ape on her parents the night earlier for making her fly first-class commercial, but she was the one receiving the apology. I don't think I managed to stifle my laughing. Honestly, this is not funny. This girl's gonna grow up to be a horrible person. I used to work at a private alternative school for at-risk youth in the Northeast. Parents sent their kids there from all over the world and paid about $80K a year for their entitled kids to go there. Biggest meltdown I ever saw was from a kid who lived in my dorm. We had a status system so those on the lowest status couldn't have their personal electronics from the time they turned them in the previous night until about 6 p.m. the next day. This kid notoriously skipped class to play WoW all day long and simply refused to turn his electronics into me. His advisor finally convinced him that turning in his electronics was a better idea than not doing it, so he turned them into me. The kid came to me asking for his electronics a few hours too early, and I said no. Since this kid was 18, he threatened to drop out and literally walk home. This was in the middle of nowhere, and this kid lived about an hour or two away. I stood my ground and still said no, so he ran downstairs to his room to pack his things. I called the admin on duty, and he came and determined it was a situation for the headmaster to get involved. He also came, and the kid threw enough of a hissy fit that they both came to me asking for the electronics. I handed them over and the kid calmed down, but it didn't end there. He decided he needed revenge. So one night, he and another student decided that they would spray my car with a fire extinguisher. The only reason I know it was him was because my advisee managed to get a video of it. The guy who was the head of the dorm next to mine was a volunteer firefighter, so he said to me the next morning, "Hey man, looks like your car got sprayed with a fire extinguisher." I didn't think anything of it, but he continued with, "That stuff will melt the paint off your car and etch your windows. You need to go wash it now." So I booked it to the nearest car wash and spent about $100 to save my paint. Luckily, the school reimbursed me and charged the family of the two kids for the cost of the wash. We're in a small town with one major manufacturing chain which pretty much owned everything in town. It recently moved its headquarters out of state and had an IPO. Anyway, the owning family, we'll call them Schmidt, had a Stanford-bound son who was attending the same driver's ed class as my sister, who had no idea who he was. Anyway, my sister, who entertains herself by persistently slightly annoying or flirting with random people, happened to make super rich Stanford-bound teen the object of her flirting. She flicked a tiny piece of paper at him, played with his hair a bit, and he says, "I'm Adam Schmidt," as if to say, "How dare you?" My sister had no idea that was supposed to mean something and just smilingly said, "Hi," then went back to flicking tiny paper balls at him. "I'm Adam Schmidt," he repeated. My sister was still undeterred. This went on for a while when he finally shouted in class, "I'm Adam Schmidt. Don't you know who my father is?" We looked him up after. Turns out he was a pretty big deal, and that phrase probably would have played really well with lots of people in our town. But to us? I had a rough time in public elementary school, so I went to a private Catholic school for middle school. I'm Jewish, but they let me attend, no doubt for the tuition, and just had me go to the computer lab when we did religion class or went to mass. One girl there hated me, just straight up would make fun of me because I was poor. My family was solidly middle class, so no. Or because my mom was an Eastern European immigrant and speaks with a thick accent. Or because I was a Jew. First time I had anti-Semitic crap hurled at me was from this little witch. Because I didn't have to sit through mass and got to play Oregon Trail instead. So my bat mitzvah comes around and my teacher decided to use it as a learning moment for the class. I explained what it was, that I get to have a big party and the whole thing. Of course, a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds are going to be into it. Especially since I was the only Jew any of them were actually close with. The attention was off her, and she was getting more and more annoyed with it all. The Monday after my party, when everyone was talking about it, she threw a huge fit in the parking lot after school when her mom picked her up, because she wouldn't let her have a bat mitzvah. Apparently she had asked, and her mother had said, "We're not Jewish, and you're having a sweet 16 in a few years, so no." She lost it and had a meltdown because she couldn't have a party celebrating a ritual of a religion she wasn't a part of and wouldn't be partaking in, when she had done nothing but talk crap about me for being in that religion for the last few months. I still remember my mother picking me up that day, listening to her bray in the parking lot. One of my good friends got a brand new Audi R8 for his 16th birthday. It matched his dad's. He got all peeved and huffy because it wasn't the right V10 or something like that. Still good friends with him though. We go to LA some weekends. His treat, of course. I didn't go to a massively pricey private school. Most of the kids there were from middle-class families who spent most of their money sending their kid to my school, because the other options were just so bad. But there were exceptions. We had 5 math sets and I was in the top 1. One day, one of the rich kids decides it would be funny to blow his nose in a 20-pound note and tosses it in a bin. A teacher sees this and flips out. He says if the kid ever does anything in that vein again, he'll move him to the bottom set. Now, about 3 weeks passed and the moron does it again. The teacher wasn't bluffing and kicks him down 4 classes. Being in set 5 compared to 1 was like walking into a room filled with Peter Griffins. After 1 class, the kid comes back blubbering to the teacher, just as we were all leaving to beg to get back into the class. It was like chicken soup for my middle-class soul. I was happy for weeks. This is just literally a complete disregard for money. Isn't it also illegal in some places to throw away or destroy currency? I knew a kid back in 4th grade. He was a little demon of a tyke, real jerk to everyone, and would lord himself over you in just about any conceivable way possible to get you to do his bidding. One day, some girl stood up to him and refused to do something. I forget what, it's been years. And he started yelling and screaming about how his big shot lawyer daddy was gonna sue her family for everything her family had. Come to find out, kid's been trying this with other kids and they all come to her defense. He turned bright red, like cherry red, and started screaming about how this whole school wanted to bring him down, and that he deserved everything that we all had. Really going to town on being an entitled brat. Ultimately, we found out that she'd forgotten to bring him his pencil he'd lent her after a class, and that's what started all the chaos. She forgot a pencil. Apparently, that was one expensive or one special pencil, cause he never shut up about it the rest of the semester, and would constantly harass and bully this poor girl over it. Kid wound up getting pulled out of school cause the bullying was so bad, and this little brat went around for the next year saying that he had her removed from the school, and his daddy was the one who had her parents remove her, saying she was worthless. He was expelled 2 years later from the same school. I wasn't there anymore, but apparently he'd brought a gun to school to try and show off how tough he really was. This one kid on his 16th birthday received a beautiful new Rolex. It was gold with a blue ring. Stunning watch. Apparently, this wasn't the color he was looking for, so he threw it over the school fence into the adjacent river. What followed can only be described as throwing a foot-long steak sub into a nest of hungry African kids. About 12 younger kids scrambled to retrieve this watch. From what I remember, his parents bought him a new watch. The right color this time, of course. Don't the parents of these children realize they're not doing them any kind of favors here? You're raising your kid to be a horrible person. Redditors who rage quit a job without thinking, what was the last straw? I worked as a painter for a franchisee of a student painting company, and he kept telling me that he would pay me next week. This went on for about 6 weeks, and the final straw was when I had finished several large projects that would give him ample money to pay me, but he decided to hire on another person instead of paying me for all the work I had already done, like $1,300 worth of work. Then he tried negotiating down what he thought he should be paying me, despite already agreeing in writing what I would be getting paid right from the get-go. I was so mad that I didn't give him notice or even show up for the next day of work, because I had bills to pay and needed to make as much money as possible during the summer. I wrote him off as a lost cause and took him to small claims court for what he owed me and eventually got my money through the court. It was still a real pain though, and as far as I know, he's still working there full time. How's your boss gonna try and negotiate your pay after there's already been a signed contract? I've never heard of that before. After working 37 years, I requested a leave from work to care for my partner who was dying of cancer. I had 8 weeks of paid time off and was denied the request, so I quit to care for him in his last month of life. That's just heartless. How are you not gonna give someone that time off? If ever there was a reason to give them time off, that is the time. And after 37 years of working there too. It's just insulting. I was working at a call center. My shift started at 10, and I badged into the building at about 9:55 and logged on. But the decrepit PC I was using took so long to boot up that when I finally logged in, I was 15 seconds late. I told my supervisor, and he said that there's nothing he can do. And since I was late, I was put on probation and wouldn't be eligible for a raise for another month, and that I should arrive 15 minutes early so that situation won't happen again. I handed in my headset, walked out, and have never worked in a call center since. I needed a summer job while I was in high school, so I applied at a local grocery store to bag, stock, and clean. My first day there was some sort of confusion as to what I was supposed to do, or to whom I was to report. I was sent to the front counter, where the customer service manager gave me a till and told me to open a register. Mind you, I'd had zero training on a register. I didn't even know how to put the till in. I told the lady this and was told to go do my job. Within about 2 minutes at the register, there was a line several deep, and I'm just standing there with the till in my hands. The customer service lady comes storming over asking why I had such a line, and I tried again to explain to her that I was supposed to be the stalker or whatever, and that I knew nothing about operating a register. She called me stupid in front of the customers, so I handed her the till and told her to screw off. I walked down the street in my uniform and got a job at another grocery store. It's the person's first day on the job and you've given them no training. How are you going to turn around and call them stupid? You're the stupid one for just expecting them to have this knowledge. I rage quit, or more like quietly abandoned a job in high school at a big warehouse clothing shop because I was hired to work stock items and the manager decided to put me behind the register and otherwise on the floor. I stocked items for about a month before this suddenly happened. What used to be unpacking boxes and putting stuff on shelves became walking around, constantly picking up clothes from the floor, and one day the register. It was a busy day and our recently hired employees were like 14. So they weren't legally able to operate the register, so the manager decided to put me on. I was 16. I was shown how to do a basic transaction exactly one time, and then left with a long line of customers. I did not know what I was doing, and did maybe 20 transactions on people's credit cards that I'm sure were wrong. When lunch break came, I went to see a buddy that worked in a Blockbuster in the same mall. I had decided to never come back, but then I realized I left my jacket in the break room. I had to come back after a 3-hour lunch and pretend that I just lost track of time in order to get access to the break room. Then I quietly snuck out again. I went through several interviews and started a new gig. I'd be providing call center support for Windows and maybe some Apple support. Nothing I couldn't handle. I am, after all, IT support. Heck, I even cleaned the mouse while I was trying to take the technical test. I get a start date and am told it'd be 2 weeks of training. No big deal, I can do 2 weeks of training. I show up on day 1 of training and it's support for Whirlpool washing machines and dryers. Hold the phone. What? That's right, classic bait and switch. I got up, walked over to my hiring manager and said, "I quit. You hired me for Windows support, not washing machines and dryers," and walked out. 2 weeks later, I get a call. "Hi, this is X, your manager. I'm calling to find out why you haven't come to work in 2 weeks. I guess you didn't get that memo. I quit on day 1 because your company lied to me. Got an $80 paycheck. About 7 years later, I got a letter in the mail that a class action lawsuit had been filed against the company for labor law violations. 2 months after that, I got an 8-cent check in the mail, which just made me laugh. I'm surprised that you even got a paycheck. I actually did this like 2 months ago for the first time. I'm a bartender and I was working in some crappy Mexican restaurant downtown. The tips were crap because the food was crap, so we were barely ever busy. So already I'm living in New York City making barely $400 a week, when I'm used to making more than double that. At this point, I've been there 2 months and I hate it more and more every day. Around this time, my mother gets really bad pneumonia, and due to complications, it degraded her heart. So she has to have open heart surgery to repair a valve. It's a risky procedure and my mother is touching 65. Now, let me state that staff turnover was incredibly high, because in addition to us making horrible money, the manager was a complete and utter moron. Most staff left after a month. So my mom gives me a date for her surgery. I go to my manager and give her a basic breakdown of the situation and tell her I need 4 days off from X to Y so I can be with my family. She says no problem, but just to play it safe, I send emails and texts to her confirming that I indeed do have these days off. She agrees. I think, cool, no problem. Oh boy, was I wrong. 3 days before the surgery, the schedule for the week comes out, and I'm scheduled through the entire week. I immediately go to my manager and ask what the heck is going on, because I'm not wasting away behind this moldy rat-infested bar in the West Village while my mom has surgery. No lies, this woman has the nerve to say I didn't request it off at all. When I show her my paper trail stating that yes, I did put in a request, she says, "What difference does it make if you're there? The surgery is going to have the same outcome whether you're there or not," and starts rattling off about how I need to be a team player and I'm messing up her schedule by requesting time off and yada yada yada. Her voice fades off and I literally see red. I say nothing and go back to work. This is at 5 p.m. Happy hour and our rush starts at 8. I'm the only bartender on today. Fast forward to 8:30. My bar is slammed. I have a bunch of drink tickets from the servers and it's a mess. Total chaos. My manager comes behind the bar and instead of offering any assistance, she tells me not to bring any home drama to work. I just stare at her in disbelief for a moment, truly stunned that such a tone-deaf moron could possibly be in charge of anything. I laughed in her stupid face and walked right out of the door and went to go see my mom. P.S. My mom made a full recovery. I was 21 working at UPS, was a truck loader the first year, became the fastest worker in the warehouse just because I like working quickly. Only wanted to become a supervisor because my manager was really easy to work with and always wanted to help with solutions to problems. Once they promoted me to supervisor, they transferred my manager to a different warehouse and didn't say why. Worked as a supervisor for a year, and once peak season arrived, mid-November, early January, things were getting crazy, and my manager was just a yes man to his boss. Never helped solve issues, just said figure it out or get it done. Well, in November, my best friend and I had won a World Series of Beer Pong satellite tourney to get a free entry and stay at the Flamingo in Vegas for the tournament worth $600. The tournament was from January 1st to 5th. Well, peak season is nearly impossible to get time off, and I looked at this tournament as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with my best friend. Things were just getting so crazy, and they weren't approving any vacation requests. I wasn't getting assistance from my boss with the workload, so I just said screw it, I'm out. Come to find out, my manager, his boss, and 4 other managers got fired for changing time cards to make their production numbers look better. Which I found out is why they shipped my cool manager away, because he wouldn't participate in the dirty deeds. My best friend and I placed 46th out of 500 teams. It's one of the best memories I have to this day. No regrets. I used to work as a housekeeper at a really shady hotel. Wasn't the best job in the world, but the pay actually wasn't that bad. The owner and his wife were horrible to everyone, especially the housekeepers. I eventually worked my way to being the head housekeeper, but they kept referring to me as a maid. I don't know why that bothered me so much, but it did. Anyway, the rodeo was in town and we were really busy. I had every single room to clean, and none of my other housekeepers were showing up for work. So I asked my boss where they were, and he said he gave them the day off. They're young and have stuff to do. They were all high schoolers and I was 19 at the time. It was summer, so he decided he wanted them to go out and have fun and leave the 65 rooms to me. I was already mad at that, but then it got worse. I get to about my 15th room and I'm already exhausted. I just want to get one more done so I can take a break. I knock on the door and there's no answer. So I let myself in to see a man standing naked in the doorway. I apologize and try to leave when he calls me back. He said he wanted me to clean the room. I told him I couldn't while he was still there, and certainly not while he was naked. He said I had to do it. He was a guest. I go to my boss and explain why I wasn't cleaning that room. He told me I had to do what the customer said. If he wanted to be naked and in the room while I cleaned, then that's what had to happen. I threw my cleaning rag at him, told him to screw off, and left the rest of the rooms to him. I worked as a stock boy in the back of Hollister. Clothing retail for those unaware. Never really had any interaction with customers, but was still forced to buy their clothes to wear to work. They had all these rules about hairstyles, fingernails, and facial hair. One night, I came in to start a shift at 2:30 a.m. to do a floor change, so middle of the night, and the shift would end around the time the store opened up. I had the slightest bit of stubble on my face, like a day and a half's worth of stubble. My manager at 4 a.m. told me she had a problem with my facial hair, and that when the mall opened up, I better go buy a razor and shave before anyone saw me like that, or she'd have to send me home for the night. I basically said, well, lucky for me, I was planning on quitting anyways. Good luck with the floor change, and walked out. Went and got a biscuit breakfast, went home and got in bed. I understand that there's rules and etiquette that you have to follow at any given job, but there also needs to be some leeway given by the managers in reasonable situations. I think this would qualify. The boss not doing payroll before leaving on a business trip and leaving it to the poor office manager to tell people they weren't going to get paid on time. I walked out of a staff meeting saying I'd be back when the paychecks arrived. By the time I got home, I was mad enough to call my ops manager back and quit. Why didn't the boss do payroll? The stated answer was printer toner cartridge at home was empty. Guess he'd never heard of writing checks with a pen. Yeah, my printer ink is low, so y'all don't get paid. Okay, bye. That's such a jerk move. Earlier in my career in residential HVAC, I thought it'd be a good idea to branch out a little, to add some tools to my tool bag, so to speak. So I took a position as a lead installer at a smaller company. It wasn't particularly bad, it just wasn't in my wheelhouse, and I grew to dislike installing and tried to shift back over to the service department. My manager knew I wanted to transfer, but wouldn't let me despite my prior experience, and instead hired another tech. Now, part of the reason I didn't want to do install anymore was because of the salesmen. They were idiots. The concept of a tape measure was completely lost on them, and there were times they'd overpromise at the expense of me and my assistant. One day in particular, the residential salesman had us install the wrong type of evaporator coil, that's the thing that makes cold happen, in an attic without taking any proper measurements beforehand. It didn't fit between the joists, and when I asked for someone to come help, I was told to use your imagination. We managed to get it done, sort of, but at 5:30 it literally fell apart. I was apologetic, called the salesman, and unloaded on him. We hacked it together just enough and we left. The next day at the shop, the salesman tried talking to me and I quit on the spot. He said that we had a meeting with a Lennox rep and to reconsider and please just think about it. He must have thought I'd agreed because when I went to turn in my timesheet in the meeting room, he began to introduce me as the lead installer and service tech when it's slow. So I look at him and reply, "Psh, I was," and walked out. I feel like this kind of thing probably happens a lot in this kind of industry, where the salesman is just trying to make a sale and they'll kick up the price as much as they possibly can because they're getting a commission off it, not really thinking or caring whether or not the installer can actually do the job. My first job at aircraft maintenance was for a grumpy old dirtbag. I was a completely green apprentice fresh out of school, and the old guy had no understanding of what his obligations were when taking on an apprentice, and expected me to just know everything already. He'd send me to do jobs unsupervised, wouldn't provide any instruction or guidance, then get upset if I messed something up. He chewed me out for taking too long to do stuff. He'd occasionally call me into his office and quiz me on random crap, then belittle me for not having all the answers, telling me he was going to phone up his buddies at the college and tell them how disappointed he was with the quality of their graduates. The guy was a total hypocrite too. He didn't have current manuals for any of the aircraft, didn't properly track parts and hardware, he literally had a room full of spare parts with no history, and took all kinds of shortcuts. One time during a windscreen replacement, rather than measuring out the hardener for a sealant, he eyeballed it. It was supposed to set up in a couple hours, but it hadn't hardened after 3 days, so he made me paint over it. We were supposed to cut open and inspect every oil filter we replaced, looking for metal that would indicate a failing engine. He'd store all the old oil filters on a giant workbench without labeling them, and after a year or two, go inspect them all at once. If any had metal, there was no way of knowing which which aircraft it came from. He got away with being bad at his job because the Transport Canada inspector responsible for audits in that area was a friend of his. And he'd boast about how audits consisted of them talking over donuts in the break room for 3 days. Anyway, it was the last day of my probation, and he called me into his office to tell me he had a very difficult decision about whether to keep me on. I told him I'd make it easy for him and quit on the spot. As a former aircraft maintenance mechanic, this literally made me wince. I honestly didn't think in this day and age, with the amount of regulation and monitoring, places like that could still exist. I hope that dude gets what he deserves, cause he'll kill people. I worked on a farm throughout high school for a very wealthy couple. The husband was a successful commercial real estate agent, and the wife trained dogs to do hunt and field tests. I primarily worked for the wife, assisting in training the dogs, but as it was a farm, I did various things for the husband as well. The husband was a raging alcoholic who would get angry if you didn't share a drink with him when offered. When his wife was out of town participating in competitions with the dogs, I would have to drive over to the farm multiple times a day to feed the horses, clean out their stalls, etc. And I would often run into him, but I tried to avoid it when possible, because he made me uncomfortable. Anyway, I was like 17 and it was summer, so I accidentally slept through my 6 a.m. alarms one morning, and I didn't get to the farm until around 8 to feed the horses and clean out their stalls. Not like it mattered, the horses can't tell time. The husband was there and had already been drinking, as I could smell it on him. And he started laying into me about being so late. He told me I was a poor white trash piece of garbage, and if my parents let me oversleep for my job, then they're even worse white trash pieces of garbage, and I won't ever amount to anything just like them, yada yada yada. I told him he could rake up the horse poop himself, and that I quit. And as I was leaving, he was yelling at the top of his lungs that he would find me and kill me. I never went back. When I was in between jobs, I applied to work a construction job that needed harness-trained people. I was just coming off working as a solar installer, so I figured I'd give it a shot. First day on the job, they take me up to the top of their scaffolding section to clamp down beams. No biggie. I ask where their walkboards or scaffolding walks are for this floor, because all the other floors have walkways, whereas this one is just 1-inch beam, 3-foot gap, 1-inch beam all the way across, 100+ feet in the air. They tell me they don't have any. Okay, I guess I'll deal. After a few hours of grueling work, I depleted my gallon jug of water and was getting dizzy. I called down to the elevator operator to bring me down. Without missing a beat, he shouts, "Climb!" and walks off to smoke a cigarette. I climbed down all 14 or so stories on angled beams with no harness, while bordering on heat exhaustion. I walked up to the foreman, told him he was going to kill someone and it wasn't going to be me. Then I left. I worked at Best Buy in the mid-thousands. I started as a cashier and eventually made my way to the customer service booth, which was something you had to earn. One day, it was a bit busier than usual, and I was in the booth with another girl who was a notoriously lazy person. The boss asked her to jump on a register to clear out a line, and she said no. So the boss asked me, and I also said no, because I was already given another task. The next day, they pulled me into the office and told me I was demoted because of it. I walked right to my locker, grabbed my stuff, and left. Turns out, the other girl was sleeping with the boss, and that's why she was allowed to say no, but I couldn't. Sleeping with the boss aside, shouldn't you get some kind of warning or talking to about this instead of just an immediate demotion for something like that? Also, you weren't able to do it because you were busy working on something else. Otherwise, you might have been willing to help out and jump in. Teachers of Reddit, what's the most delusional thing you've seen a parent do? I work in a daycare, and for 3 months, this one dad would come in and yell at us that his kid wasn't potty trained yet. The kicker of the entire thing was that his kid wasn't even 2. I used to teach children's art classes. One girl turned up and shyly said hi to me. Her mom got cross with her and sternly made her go back outside so that she could re-enter the room and make an impression. The girl came back and gave me a nice big fake smile and wave and loudly said hello. The mother also spent way too much time making sure I realized that they lived in a very rich suburb and went to a very elite private school. I just feel bad for the kid having to deal with a mom like that. I'm not a teacher, but I'm sure if the teacher in question was a Redditor, my story would be here. My primary school taught Chinese. My mom has very strong opinions towards Asians, so much so that she refused to let me participate in these lessons. The school said they weren't going to employ someone to sit in a classroom and supervise me while all the other students had the Chinese lesson. So my mom did it. Once a week throughout grades 1 to 7, all my classmates would go to another classroom for their lesson, while I would stay in my classroom with no one but my mom. Did she really not have anything better to do? There's no way my daughter plagiarized. She didn't copy and paste it. She printed it out and retyped every word. That's still never mind. First day of my mom's kindergarten class in 90s Orange County, a parent says to my mom, "My child is going to Harvard. What are you going to do to get him there?" Those are some high expectations for a kindergarten teacher. The parent of a high school student who constantly disrespected me and acted up in class believed that if he sat in during my class, his daughter would behave. The father and daughter got into an argument during class and were both asked to leave because they were interrupting the lesson. Great, now there's 2 of them. Let their kids skip more than a third of the school days, never answered or returned a single call, nor showed up for a single parent conference, and then claimed that I should be fired for being a bad teacher when their kid failed. Another teacher I work with has a kid who refuses to come to class or participate unless her parents buy her something each week. The parent always gives in to the bribe, every week, and the kid still sometimes refuses to do anything anyway. My mom is a principal in a not very nice area and has to deal with some pretty rough parents. A couple of months ago, some girl beat the crap out of another girl in the cafeteria. When my mom brought her down to the office, she threatened to fight my mom. So my mom called her mom. Her mom then came in and also threatened to fight her. No fighting occurred. Police were called though. Gee, I wonder where she gets it. I was a para in a special ed classroom. We had one boy with autism who was 9 years old. His mom told me one day that it hurts him to poop in the toilet. She would let him poop in his pants. Then she would put the poop in the toilet and his underwear in a bucket of bleach water. He used the bathroom by himself no problem all the time at school. He was clearly not in pain pooping on the toilet. What? Why is this mom being so extra? I worked for a socialization program for children with special needs. I had a mother of a fantastic young boy with severe autism and no verbal skills full out argue publicly with my boss that he needed to be moved to a class with the highest functioning kids. She told us her baby had nothing wrong with him. He's a wonderful kid, but he couldn't handle that much stimuli. He clearly struggled to be able to communicate. I think a fair amount of parents whose children have special needs are really in denial and to the detriment of their children's development. We all get blamed for the student's bad grades. Kid had 30 missing assignments. Of course, it's the teacher's fault he's failing the class. Very annoying. Yeah, that's gotta be like the default, right? I'm sure you guys get that all the time. I used to be a high school teacher's assistant during the summer. These summer classes were usually taken by students who failed them the first time around. One mother comes up to me at the end of the semester demanding to know how her daughter had failed math a second time. I told her it was because she spent so much of her time socializing and texting on her phone during class, at which point the mom exploded saying that I was lying because her daughter didn't even have a phone, and that I was grading unfairly and that her daughter shouldn't be having such a hard time with math. Turns out the daughter had bought a cell phone off a friend and got a pay-as-you-go contract behind her mother's back after she got her phone taken away the first time she failed math. At a statewide convention for middle schoolers that included a talent show, basically a bunch of middle school kids from mostly rural areas doing magic tricks, singing, playing an instrument, signing a song in sign language, and stuff like that. The mother tells her daughter that there might be talent scouts there. The daughter freaks out and bombs her talent. Seriously? What talent scout hits up middle school talent shows? I feel like this would be like a mom from Toddlers and Tiaras or something. A boy took a picture of a special needs girl's butt because her jeans rode down a bit. He passed the picture around the school, which resulted in lots of bullying directed toward the girl. When the boy was suspended, his father appealed the suspension, blamed the school for targeting his child, and threatened to sue. This resulted in the best line I've ever heard from a school principal. "Fine, the moment I hear from your lawyer is the moment you'll be reading the charges I'll be filing on your son." Yeah, Dad, don't push it. Your son's getting off pretty light here considering. My mom is a special education teacher. She's seen numerous parents try to force their kids into special education classes just because they wanted the disability check that comes with it. It's absolutely disgusting. I was working with a class of gifted high school students taking a summer course. During a field trip, one of my students needed to go to a doctor's appointment and would be picked up early by her parents. The only way to contact the group on the field trip was my cell phone, so the parents got my personal number. In the week left in the summer course, I received 23 text messages and 15 calls asking why their 10th grade daughter had not called them back. What? Why do you have anything to do with that? Principal here had a kid who was gifted and who almost died at birth. Mom felt super guilty, and as a result, she wouldn't dare do or say anything to upset him. So the kid ran the show. The kid got other kids and teachers in trouble by lying, then would tell his mom some story and she would come sailing in to his defense. Even said things like her son would never lie. Anyway, the year in my school was a gong show. After that year, the kid convinced his mother that the whole school was full of bullies, mean teachers, and an incompetent principal. They withdrew him and put him in a private school. Good move. I caught a girl cheating by writing formulas on her hand. She told the dean and her mother that that was how she studied, and she'd forgotten to wash it off. Mom believed her and set up a conference with me to explain. The dean did not, and she got a Saturday school. Think Breakfast Club. Dance teacher here. I had a parent pull her 3-year-old daughter out of a dancing concert, which she had paid roughly $300 in performing costs and $250 in tuition, all because her child's class were cast as the mice from Cinderella and not as the mermaids from The Little Mermaid. The mouse costumes were beautiful pink and gray glitter tutus and were classed as the cutest performance of the night. After she heard the reviews, she tried to get us to stage the concert again so her daughter could perform. Talk about a world revolves around me concept. My mother was a lunch lady when I was in kindergarten, and there was a girl who was morbidly obese in my class. She couldn't walk from the classroom to the lunchroom without getting sick from the physical activity. My mom and some of the other lunch ladies started tweaking the menu when she got in line to have the healthier options out for her to eat. Her mother caught wind of this and started packing her lunch, always with cookies and Twinkies and soda. I don't know how as a parent you can allow your child to live like that, to encourage it. I'm not saying don't give your kids treats, but how do you let it get to that point? If it's kindergarten and this is already an issue, then yeah, there's a problem that you need to address. Mom, you're not helping anything. You're actively making the process worse and getting in the way of those who are trying to help and care about your child's health. I was a student, but dealt with a crazy parent. Mom of a classmate complained that I missed over 50% of the class and received an A, but their kid who only missed one day failed. She tried to get me suspended when she saw that her son wasn't going to be passed. I had to go to a parent-teacher conference consisting of my classmate, his mom, me, and the admins for 2 whole weeks during lunches to try and explain to this lady that I wasn't going to be failed. I teach elementary French, and as a treat at the end of the month, the kids get to watch a little bit of a movie in French. So I sent home a notice to parents to let them know this was the plan, and give them an idea of some of the shows I was thinking about. One of them was Beauty and the Beast. Shortly after I sent this notice home, one of the parents emailed me to tell me why they were fine with most of the choices, but didn't want their daughter watching Beauty and the Beast. There was no explanation for why. I've been told by the other teachers that this girl's parents are kind of bizarre, and have heard a couple of stories in the few months I've been there. They're a highly religious family, and don't want their children exposed to anything they deem inappropriate. What's inappropriate about Beauty and the Beast? Are you going to turn around and say that all the furniture moving around and having life is ungodlike or something? I don't understand your argument here. I saw a parent rip an evolution poster from the wall, claiming that it impacted her religious freedom. I had no idea evolution and religion are in a battle to the death. My first parent conference in 2005. The mom brings a large cardboard box full of hand lotion and a doctor's note for her student. The doctor's note states that the student is to use the restroom each class period as needed. The large cardboard box full of hand lotion is for the son's insatiable desire to take care of himself. 6 months into my first year teaching, this kid asks to use the restroom. I allow him, and while he's in the restroom, he scales a 10-foot cinder block wall into the ceiling tiles and tries to cross over to the women's restroom. He uses a pencil to poke holes into the ceiling tiles so he can peek into the women's restroom stalls. Eventually, his weight caused him to fall through the tiles and he impacts the support walls of 2 stalls. The end result? Broken clavicle and humerus, separated shoulder, torn ligaments in knee, and severe concussion. After the incident, the student was expelled from school and enrolled in outdoor programs. What kind of doctor gives your kid a note for that? I'm still in student teaching, but when I was in high school, students could rent a MacBook for the school year. You filled out a contract and weren't allowed to replace certain parts or install certain things. Naturally, one kid I was acquainted with who constantly bragged about getting around the rules got caught and was to have his school-issued laptop revoked for the rest of the school year, as well as be suspended for a short amount of time. His mom stormed in, made the assistant principal cry in her surrounded by windows office, and the kid showed up 2 days later with his laptop back. It wasn't a question if the kid could afford a laptop without the school's reduced rental price. He had numerous desktop computers and a personal laptop. Honestly, this story just makes me feel bad for the assistant principal. Some parents can just be the worst when it comes to their kid. One time, a kid got into a fight with another kid in the hallway. He got this kid on the ground and started kicking the crap out of him. As he was kicking, his sneaker flew off and got stuck in the ceiling tiles. As I'm leaving school for the day, he's standing with his mother in the front office, and she's screaming at the poor principal because her son only had 1 shoe. What, does she think the principal confiscated 1 shoe? A couple hired me to teach their 13-year-old overweight daughter to ride a bike, a deal to which she only agreed if they bought her a $450 bike. They did. During the lesson, she sat down and pouted and refused to do anything. I still got paid. Special education teacher here. A parent recently told me that they believe their son shouldn't be sped by middle school if I'm doing my job right. Their son is nonverbal and severely autistic. It just made me sad. I think this comes back to one of our previous posters' comments about some of these parents just being in denial, unfortunately. I teach in Japan, and in Japan, a parent has to voluntarily put their child in special needs classes. If they don't, the student must take normal classes with every other student. I can't tell you how many times I've seen children with severe learning disabilities be forced to sit in a normal class they can't understand, all because a parent is in denial or ashamed that their child isn't normal. Ugh, sounds like we're gonna have a lot of these, aren't we? My wife teaches, and I'm her assistant. I help with grading papers, posting grades, classroom help with computers. She teaches special ed, mostly with inner-city children who have never been able to learn to read. She can teach anyone to read. 3 years ago, she was working with a boy who was in 7th grade and unable to read. After a few months, she got him up to 3rd grade level. Then his mom came to the school very angry. "You gotta stop this or I'm gonna lose his learning disability check if they find out he can read. Mind your own damn business." Oh my god, is this really that popular of a thing? Right now, parents think excused absences means the student doesn't have to make up work. I've had 4 parents call me in the past week calling me out for their kids' grades being lowered, all because they didn't do the makeup work and got a 0. Their only argument is, well, it's an excused absence. Preschool teacher here. One year, I had a set of twins with some serious behavioral problems. They wouldn't do anything we wanted them to. They participated in nothing and did only what they wanted to do when they wanted to do it. Cleanup time? My dad says that I shouldn't have to clean up because I'm not a girl. WTF? Did he really just say that? Yes, every single class. There were many conferences with the parents. The dad insisted the kids were fine and they could do what they wanted. We'd explain that in order for us to teach them anything, including how to behave appropriately in a classroom setting before kindergarten next year, he'd have to tell them to listen to us. But he felt that his 4-year-old boys shouldn't listen to any woman, including their own mother, who had so little control over them that she never took them out of the house, which she reported they had completely destroyed. Their behavior was so terrible that we assumed they were on the spectrum before we spoke with their dad, and maybe they were, but mostly they've been raised to believe that women are never in a position of authority. And the worst part, they had a younger boy and another on the way. That poor woman. Her husband had completely hobbled her ability to raise them while leaving her to raise them alone while he worked. They told the director they were moving back to the Middle East just before she kicked them out for being utterly unmanageable. Oh, it really sounds like this father's raising these kids to be a couple of little hellions. I had a parent ask what I taught the kids about Martin Luther King Day because his kid came home and said that white people hate black people. Of course I didn't tell your first grader that. Racism is in the second grade curriculum. My friend is a 6th grade teacher. The way her middle school works is that she's in charge of a class of about 25 kids. She teaches them a few subjects. I know math, science, and reading and spelling. She then switches with her partner teacher to teach his kids the same subjects while he does social studies and whatever other subjects there are with her class. Not too long ago, kids in her class began to complain that things were missing from their desks. They were able to keep the things they didn't need for their lessons in the other room in their desks. Whole lunches turned up missing, all in the vicinity of this one boy. Her partner eventually caught him with something that was reported missing, and the principal made him empty his pockets. He was stealing everything. They were lenient with him, only sternly warning him not to do it anymore. The next time, they called the school security officer in to speak with him and sent a note home to his parents. The third time, they gave him in-school suspension and called his parents for a conference. His dad apparently flipped out on the phone, saying that his son did nothing wrong and that he knew what they were doing. Turns out, the boy was telling his parents that his teachers were planting the stolen items on him to get him in trouble, and his parents believed this. My poor friend is so frustrated, even though he's not technically in her class, and she's been trying to get him and his parents to speak with the social worker, but it's been to no avail. Kid sounds like an early kleptomaniac or something. A mother from the PTA offered to buy the food for the teacher luncheon during their workshop day. She went out and bought the food, and when she turned in the receipts to be reimbursed, we noticed the bottoms were torn off. It just so happens this is where the payment information is. What ended up happening is that this lady bought food with her EBT card and had the school refund her in cash for what she bought. So basically, the school was converting her EBT money into cash to spend on whatever she wanted. I once saw the parents of a football player have a stern talk with the coach because his son wasn't the starting inside linebacker. Part of what made it delusional is that his son was starting at outside linebacker, so he was already getting more playing time than the 30 or so other players that didn't have a starting role. What made it even more delusional was that the guy's son was essentially playing inside linebacker anyways. We ran a 40 base defense under the look of a 4-3 defense. That means that before every play, our strong safety moves into the outside linebacker role, and one of the outside linebackers becomes an inside linebacker. I don't know football at all, but it sounds like this dad already had what he wanted. I had an undergrad student sleep through my cell biology lab classes where the majority of their project is meant to be self-motivated. As the teacher's assistant, I teach techniques, but I'm not meant to do the project for them. At the end of the semester, this kid was failing, and I got an email from his mother telling me that clearly I wasn't doing my job because her son couldn't possibly be failing my lab. I responded by recommending he get a full 8 hours of sleep a night when retaking the course the following year. Back when I was doing my practice teaching, I sat in on a parent-teacher interview between my supervising teacher and the parent of a child who had an exceptionality. The interview was fairly standard, with the teacher showing the parents a few samples of the student's work, commenting on how well the 17-year-old was getting at printing his name, and how he was doing well remembering a few details from fairy tales and the like. It was not until the parent asked the teacher what university program his child should take that I realized how clueless the parent was. The student could neither read nor write and had been in special education classes for all of his schooling. University was not in the cards for this one. While teaching first grade, I came across a girl that had already been held back in kindergarten, but was still failing in the first grade. She couldn't read, never did her homework, and never put any effort into catching up with her classmates. One day, out of the blue, she told me that if the school tried to hold her back again, her mother had told her that they would just move back to the last state they lived in. It infuriated me that even in the first grade, her mother had already instilled the idea in this little girl that she could run away from any problems, and that would be easier than putting forth any effort. The girl did move back to that other state before the year was over, and I think about how hard her life is going to be as she grows up with that mentality. Another case of the parents just not doing the child any favors. You gotta teach the kid to put in a little effort sometimes. People who separated or got divorced within 1 year of getting married, when did you know it was a mistake? Not me, but my dad. He got remarried after being divorced for about 5 years. I would have been all for it, but he met this woman in another state on a business trip and would travel up to see her every weekend after they hit it off. They knew each other for 6 months before getting engaged. The engagement was only for 3 months. My brother and I tried telling him about all the red flags, telling him to take his time. My dad is very well off financially, and we kept trying to teach him things were moving too quickly, that she was only in it for the money. She moved her whole family from their hometown to the city my dad lived in, including their elderly grandmother who needed constant medical supervision. Before they were even married, the pantry was full of Whole Foods brand food instead of the local grocery store, as was tradition. We had all new furniture, and the house had to be repainted, all at his bride-to-be's request. The marriage lasted all of 2 weeks. Apparently my dad's bride had the gall to ask my dad to leave everything to her in the will, and write me and my brother out. Only then did he realize she was in it for the money. The next day, he had the marriage annulled. Someday, I'd like to know what it's like to fall so completely for someone that I don't recognize they're taking advantage of me. Must feel good for that instant before it all comes crashing down. When he choked me against a wall at a party, he was mad that I laughed at another guy's joke. People were passing by us, but just kind of looked and kept going. Lots of other stuff happened too, but it took me a while to wake up and break away. I was in denial for too long. Back in the early 1980s, I spent 6 years in the US Navy. In 1986, I was recruited to go into the US Army through a program for technical and intelligence-experienced military personnel to become warrant officers. All the Navy offered me was sea duty and more sea duty. It looked like a real good deal. I was engaged to a young lady 3 years my junior and had a bit more than $20,000 in savings. Everything looked promising with a new career and family life. The wedding went off without a hitch. I was looking at a vacation of about 3 months between exiting the Navy and entering training for the Army. It was when my recruiter contacted me over my security clearance that things went south. My credit report did not match my questionnaire. There was 3 credit cards with a $14,000 balance I didn't mention. It was no big deal, they weren't delinquent, but I needed to amend my answers to account for them. Turns out my wife had opened up a charge card at our bank, then got a couple of store cards around town. She had purchased some serious clothes and jewelry, but the real kicker? She had bought a horse. She had taken lessons as a child and decided this was going to be her new thing. There was the price of the animal, riding gear, saddle and tack, vet bills, stable fees, yada yada yada. I ended up dumping a big chunk of my savings into paying down these cards, then amending my questionnaire responses. She was from a very blue-collar family. They were very good people who worked hard for everything they had. But I don't think credit ratings and compound interest rates were much discussed at the dinner table. So I explained about credit cards, the huge interest rate, how long it would take me to pay one down, then about security clearances, and having a huge debt with no job would affect it. I treated all of this as a bump in our relationship, but things got dark real fast. My ship date was coming up, and things had to be done before I started training. I was in good physical shape, but I was facing boot camp, AIT, airborne school, ranger school, warrant officer selection, and advanced training. Basically 18 months of utter insanity. I was prepared for what I faced, but there was a lot that could go wrong. If I got through it, I was a warrant officer. But if I dropped the ball along the way, I would not only be enlisted, but junior enlisted in a job they would decide for me. In theory, I could end up a line cook in some chow hall at Camp Nowhere. About a week later, the phone rings. It's about the horse. No one was taking care of the animal or cleaning the stable or even feeding the poor thing. The stable had covered down for the sake of the animal, but we're now charging $350 a week for the extra services my wife was supposed to be doing. She was leaving our apartment every day, and I assumed it was for riding in care of the animal. And for the first week, she was. The second week, she was lawyer shopping. She wanted out. She must have gotten wind of what happened at the stable and didn't come home that night. The next day, I got served with papers. Total marriage time, 47 days. So I ended up with an apartment with 4 months on the lease, no car, and a horse. I found a new home for the horse. I had to defer my ship date and it took 14 months to settle the divorce. My security clearance was approved 2 days after the papers were filed. I shipped the next day. In the end, I had 2 pair of pants, 3 shirts, and a pair of shoes that had no business on anyone's feet. I was working 2 minimum wage jobs, 14 hours a day, paying down debt, lawyer's fees, rent, and sometimes eating to get by. I ended up at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, mowing lawns for 2 months as I shipped without a training slot for boot camp. I wasn't happy, but I was relieved. In airborne school, I met a cadet who was going to airborne school for her summer break. She had a year to go before her commission, and we hit it off. We'd get together on holidays, between training and long weekends. When I finished training and got my warrant, still a cadet, she flew across the country to give me my first salute. I gave her a silver dollar as per tradition. 2 months later, she received her commission, to which I saluted her and returned the silver dollar. Married that Christmas. We've been together for 31 years. Well, as horrible as it went the first time around, I'm glad you were able to find someone that worked with you. I knew a week after I got married when he slammed my head into the wall because he saw me looking at a man at an ice cream shop. I'm from the US and got married in England. This dude completely changed right after we got married. A couple of weeks later, I had to get out of there and come back to the US. I don't understand why this is such a thing, how you hear about people all of a sudden changing drastically after getting married. In this case, the guy got violent. Like, were you just holding it all in for a couple of years while you were dating and you think, now we're married so I can just let it all out? That's not how that works. You still have to continue to be a good person while you're married too. She nearly killed me because she thought I was cheating from some text that I sent to my mother. I was blindsided by it. We had lived together for a year, about an hour from my hometown. We relocated upon her request and desire to my hometown prior to our marriage, so that when we had kids, it's best to be close to family. We had a house we loved, a dog we loved, jobs we both loved working in. Or so I thought. Married in October. She goes to visit her sister over the next Labor Day weekend, and I can't attend due to work. Comes back the Tuesday after Labor Day and tells me she's living a lie and someone else's dream, and that she needs a divorce. I had no idea. The divorce was finalized in January. She married some dude that her sister was friends with, that she had met on that trip I was unable to attend. The following September. Life is wild sometimes. This one feels really bad because you were just completely blindsided by this. Sounds like this girl really doesn't know what she wants and is still kind of figuring it out. I'm sorry you had to go through that. On the honeymoon. We dated for 5 years, but on the honeymoon, we had a big argument over my liberal use of sunscreen. She refused to wear any because of chemicals, and I liberally use it due to my ginger skin. We seriously argued over this for a good hour, and she refused to even go into the pool with me because of the sunscreen chemicals. After a scuba adventure with her, she could barely walk because she got so burnt on her legs, whereas my skin didn't change. She then tried to convince me that it was all my fault because I didn't force her to wear the sunscreen and that the honeymoon was ruined. It was then that I realized I picked the wrong person. After a few more psycho arguments, mad at me because of something in her dreams, mad at me because I didn't bring an umbrella, I had to call it quits. I can't stay with someone who constantly blames me for their own problems. Luckily, no kids, and I got back everything I brought into the marriage. Weren't there warning signs before this though? Like, you say you were together for 5 years, and now all of a sudden on the honeymoon she's acting like this? You must have seen this behavior before. Not me, but my sister's friend. Her sister got engaged 8 months into a relationship and got married 4 months later. Everything went well the first 5 months, but the husband started acting different. He wasn't chatty, his good morning and good night kisses became dull, and things like that. Her sister would ask if everything was okay, and he would say, "I'm fine," every time. Her sister didn't want to push him, so she waited for him to talk about what's bothering him. One evening, after eating dinner, the husband said he wanted to talk about their relationship. Before he could talk about it, he started crying. He cried for a few minutes and then told her he's gay. The sister filed for divorce, and after the divorce was settled, she wasn't really mad at him anymore. So she went to see him and forgave him. They became good friends, and the sister helped him become comfortable with his sexuality. She even helped him come out to his close friends and then to his family. 5 years later, the sister is now engaged to another man and expecting their first child. The ex-husband is now very happily married to a man for almost a year now. I'm glad we got one nice happy ending out of all of these. She went out for a girls' night and met a new friend named Nicole at a bar. She started texting her a lot, then going to hang out now and then. We had a baby at home and she kept trying to go hang out with this girl from another town over with no last name who I was not allowed to meet. His real name was Wesley. Ouch. I kind of thought she was going to turn out to be a lesbian, not gonna lie. I'd been fooling around with this girl for a while. I never wanted anything serious, and I knew that from the start. Then my mom was killed. I went into a deep depression, and this girl was there for me. Her mom had died of cancer about a year earlier, and I guess we really bonded over that. It pushed us much further emotionally than we ever should have gone. We ended up doing a courthouse marriage. I knew within the first month that I had messed up, but I didn't want to just give up and get divorced. Once the emotions of my mom's death passed, I realized how toxic she really was. She was an incredibly unstable person and ended up taking me into an even deeper depression. We divorced about a year ago after being married for about 10 months, and I was immediately much happier. Marriage shouldn't be taken lightly, but people also shouldn't force themselves to be in unhealthy relationships. We all make mistakes. Don't waste your life with someone that doesn't deserve you. It can be hard to end a relationship for a lot of different reasons. Something like this, I really do understand. You were both in a tough place and needed each other for support, but you just took it further than it was ever really meant to go. My sister got a civil marriage, then they moved super far away to the middle of nowhere because he got a good job. My sister never finished college, and he would remind her on a daily basis about it. She would get super depressed, and he wouldn't believe her. She got sick once, and he told her that since she didn't go to the DMV that day, she wasn't allowed to go to a theme park we were planning on going to that weekend. He would demean her whenever she couldn't get a job, or even an interview, and she applied to practically everywhere within a 50-mile radius. He called her stupid in front of me, and when I called him out, he told me to mind my own business. If he wasn't twice my size, I would have decked him. She left him after about a year because he's obviously a raging jerk. When she left, he told her she has nowhere to go, and if she went to stay with our mom, she would just be a burden like me. I was 19 and in college at the time. He's a rude jerk, but at least she got the car and the dog. This dude sounds like more of a waste of skin than he was ever accusing her of being. A cousin of mine divorced her husband after 6 months. She knew when we had to pick her up from her home after having been recently beaten. That day, we packed up all her stuff and never let her go back. The day after we got married, he slapped me across the face, hard and completely out of the blue. No argument, no conversation leading up to it, nothing. He said it wasn't that hard of a hit, and he was just joking around and I was being dramatic. He had never gotten violent with me while dating, but as soon as we got married, it was like a switch flipped, and he was a completely different person. It got worse very quickly, and I ended up filing for divorce 73 days after we got married. My mother-in-law got married for the first time when she was really young. Left him a month later. Turns out he was a raging alcoholic. She had no idea because her family was super overprotective, and they were never really allowed to spend time together alone before they got married. Who knew that spending time with someone could be the key to knowing if they're a good partner? That's why I could never get behind the idea of an arranged marriage. The whole thing just sounds crazy to me. Not within a year, but about 18 months. She was constantly complaining she didn't have friends after moving in with me, joined a local soccer team, and she talked about one teammate non-stop for months. I had a bad feeling about it from the get-go, but she assured me they were just friends, and how dare I not trust her. I thought I was going crazy because my gut told me something wasn't right, but I was punishing myself for being a bad husband and not trusting my wife. Turns out it was all true. She'd been screwing the teammate for months. She was most likely screwing someone else during our engagement. We officially split amicably as of last week without any mess, thank God. A cousin of mine married someone who seemed like the perfect woman. They worked in the same store together, and he would brag about how his wife was getting promoted quickly in the company. A few months into the marriage, she tells him she's going out with friends for the evening. An hour or so later, my cousin gets a call from one of his friends. The friend saw her having dinner in a restaurant with the manager of the store that they both worked at. Once he confronted her about it, that was basically the end of the marriage. I mean, if she's not a great worker, then her getting all those promotions might have been an earlier clue. I got married in late May. By August or September, I found out from my dad that my husband, now ex, and my brother's wife were sending some inappropriate texts back and forth. She was also my bridesmaid at my wedding. She felt guilty and told my dad, who had to tell me. I forgave him like a dingus, and about a year and a half later, I found pictures of him fooling around with 2 different guys in our house, and also wearing quite a bit of my nice makeup. Of course, all of this after we moved to Washington from Florida. It's been wild, but we're obviously divorced now. Whoa, so this dude was just willing to fool around with anyone, it sounds like. My brother died a week after the wedding, and after about 2 months, he told me that was just too big of a thing to happen in the beginning of a marriage. I tried for 6 more months and then just gave up. It's really sad to hear that the husband couldn't find it in them to be able to support their new wife through a very hard time. This has got to be one of the most selfish things I've ever heard. You'd committed to spending your entire life with someone. Something goes bad in the first week and you're out? I can't begin to understand. A couple of weeks into our marriage, anytime we would fool around, it started to physically hurt. I went to my OB for a test or 2. She informed me that I had contracted chlamydia. That's when I knew. Turns out my newlywed husband had been banging his coworker for months. The day after the wedding, when he poked me in the chest and said, "You're gonna do what I say whether you like it or not." Big mistake. I feel like this one could have been playful, but obviously you're the judge of his tone, and it sounds like he wasn't being playful and being serious. In which case, yeah, screw that guy. Best girlfriend I'd had to date at the time. I was in my late 30s and had never been married. Dated for about a year. We got married, and shortly after, she asked to have her name on all of my assets. A few rental houses, the current house, some financial instruments, the cars, and things like that. Not a problem since we're married, I thought. But on a Wednesday, she insisted that it be done by that Friday. I didn't have time to do that because work and a deadline. I could start it the next week, I said. She pitched a fit and said if I loved her, I would do it by Friday. I found this strange and decided not to start it and see what happened. She moved out of our bedroom into a guest room, got cold around the house, told me she would move back into our bedroom when I finished getting everything done. At this point, I thought, bull, and told her so. I went to my family lawyer to seek advice. She advised me not to put anything in her name at this point. Gave me the name of a marriage counselor. She didn't want to go to counseling. She continued to live in the guest room. I took my lawyer's advice and did nothing about the assets. The long and the short of it was that after 1 year of marriage, when on our anniversary, she told me I didn't have her in my heart. I thought to myself, this is bull. About a week after that, I told her if this was the way it's gonna be, I'm not gonna be married like this. She then told me, okay, so what are you gonna give me? Yes, she said that. I consulted my lawyer on what a judge would come up with regarding community property for the past year. Number came up to 20G. I took that number and added another 20 grand and proposed that to her so we can make it easy. I was gonna spend way more than that in lawyer fees if it got ugly. It got ugly. A week later, I got served with papers. With all said in the complaint, when added up, she was going after $750K for 1 year of marriage, 1 year of divorce proceedings, and 2 years of property settlement proceedings on what should have been a 2-hour problem. Judgment came. 215 points in the judgment. I owed her what would have been the community property, about 20 grand, but awarded me attorney's fees. So in the net, she owed me about 30 grand and left her to go buy her own car. Turns out this judge had worked her butt off through school to become a lawyer, and the same to become a judge by 40 years old. I was told by another attorney that normally this judge never gives attorney's fees, but was so peeved off at the gold dig my wife had attempted that she felt it was justified in this case. Even though I came out okay financially, it was an emotional train wreck to have this happen and go through all that. It's been 15 years since it happened. I was not dateable for about 2 years, but now very happy with who I am and who I'm with. Thank God you were able to have a judge that was able to see through this woman's bull. The fact that she ended up having to give you a bunch of money in return just makes it even better. Reddit, what's the funniest thing that a random stranger said to you that made you die laughing inside? I was in the drive-thru of a Wendy's one time. An employee exited the building with his headphones on and was singing "Who Let the Dogs Out" at the top of his lungs. He saw me, stopped singing, and started walking away. A few seconds later, he comes up to my window and said, "Yeah, that is what I'm listening to." Then he walked away. I laughed so hard at the whole situation. I assume he was just doing a bit for his friends inside and you just had the pleasure of witnessing it. Okay, the laughter was not entirely inside, but years ago on the subway in New York, a crazy dude walks on the train and starts screaming at everyone, "You're all going to hell!" and then steps off as the doors close. Total silence as the weirdness of the moment settles in. Then, without missing a beat, guy across from me goes, "Crap, I thought this train was going to Harlem." Entire subway car of cynical New Yorkers bursts out laughing. I gotta admit, that's probably the best response that guy could have come up with. I was helping a customer pick out a new bra, and she said she wanted her breasts to be lifted. She said, "My boobs are so saggy that if my nipples were eyeballs, I'd be able to see if my shoes were untied." I really tried my best to remain professional, but I couldn't stop laughing. She said it to get a laugh out of you. You're allowed to laugh. Was leaving Walmart and the 80-ish-year-old greeter says, "Thanks for shopping at Dollar Tree." Okay, one of two things happening here. Either one, their greeters may be starting to lose it just a little bit, or two, they just like doing it for fun. What are you gonna do, fire the 80-year-old greeter for making a joke? A movie had just ended. Me and my dad joined the mad rush to the bathrooms. Urinals are packed. It's our turn and we're doing our business, and suddenly someone rips a huge fart. It's pretty funny, but we all have manners and we're still peeing. Suddenly this dude proclaims, "It was me!" and runs out the door. The whole bathroom erupts in laughter. I must have been about 10 or 11. I sat down on a bench next to an old guy to sort out my shoe. I took my shoe off and he just turns to me and says, "Are they golfing socks?" I look at him with a completely blank look on my face, thinking, WTF? As I looked away, he just said, there's a hole in one. This dude saw an opportunity for a dad joke with a random kid and just went for it. I can't say I blame him. The time I was waiting for takeout and the amputee owner struck up a conversation. My friend, you have to be really careful if you ever get shot in the knee or any leg bone. They don't warn you that you can't have sex for months. One night you're taking home a beautiful girl to show her your scars, and the next morning your leg's gone. I feel like he might not be telling that story correctly. A few years ago, I let a friend cut my hair. It did not go well. I was living in Philadelphia at the time and was walking through South Philly when I passed two strangers in the middle of a conversation. As I pass, one of them says to the other, "Hold up, I gotta talk to this guy." He proceeds to shout at me, "Hey yo, your hair looks horrible, come over here." I was amused, partly because of his bluntness and partially because he wasn't wrong. I was curious, so I walked over to him and he says, "Look, a buddy of mine owns a barber shop 2 blocks away. Here's his business card. I'll write my name on there. If you mention that I sent you, he'll give you a good deal." Bruh, but seriously, take care of that. I never ended up going to his friend's shop, but I frequently use this story as the perfect example of Philly culture. Rude, blunt, and in your face, yet somehow coming from a place of genuine care. Plus, it's just hilarious. A few months ago, I was waiting at a road crossing with loads of other strangers, waiting for the man to turn green. This was a busy main road in my city. The little girl on the other side of the road did the most accurate impression of the beep beep that the crossing makes so blind people know it's safe to cross. And the entire crowd of people just stepped into the road. I had seen her do it, so I stayed put, but I couldn't stop laughing. My girlfriend was very confused. 50 adults pranked by one absolute genius 6-ish-year-old. It was magical. By the way, it was really busy, so traffic was hardly moving. There was no chance of being injured. It could have been a lot worse, but yeah, people need to actually pay attention and not just go off a random audio cue that a 6-year-old gave you. May of 2000, passing through Norwood, Louisiana with a friend. At around 2 in the afternoon, we stopped to gas up and grab some snacks at the most podunk gas station known to man. A young man, extremely agitated, comes in with frustrated gestures and angrily shouts and gestures at the cashier with an accent that is beyond region, beyond stereotyping, beyond anything I have ever heard before. "Where you got John Wally Mellion at?" At the top of his lungs, approaching hysteria and tears. I feel like I should probably translate this one for you, as I had to read it as it was said. He was asking, "Where are the god-darned watermelons at?" Just to be clear. When I was about 8 years old, 40 some odd years ago, my mother and I were waiting to be seated at a restaurant, and an older gentleman was ahead of us also waiting. The waitress asked him if he'd be smoking, back when that was still a thing in restaurants, and he replied, "No, but I may burst into flames later." Young me laughed all through lunch at that. In fact, it still makes me giggle. The college I attend frequently has local elementary and middle school kids on tours, especially on Fridays. One particular Friday, I was in line for the cafeteria when a group of kids came walking by with a tour guide. One kinda chubby little dude looked a bit uncomfortable. He was biting his lip a little and sweating. This part of the tour is usually where they have a bathroom break, and clearly Buddy needed to go. At this point, I should note that the bathrooms are visible from where we were standing, but the tour guide, a fellow student of mine, didn't seem to notice. She just kept going on and on, talking about the history of the building. I watched this kid go from nervous to deeply anxious to visibly clenching over the span of about 3 minutes. He's staring at the stick figure dude on the men's bathroom sign as if it was the risen Christ. Miss Tour Guide takes a break in her spiel. I figure she's done. The next words out of her mouth will be the ones to free this boy from the purgatory that is having to use the bathroom on a school trip. It'll be over. He'll be free. What followed instead was this. So, in 1995, a professor named ABC Kalamazoo, "Move, lady, I'm gonna poop my pants!" He ran past her to the bathroom and presumably destroyed it. Poor guy. Had the entire line in tears with laughter though. Hey, when you gotta go, you gotta go. Tour guide needs to pick up on these things. When I was a freshman in college, I had a pair of rainbow bell-bottoms that I had made myself and wore quite a bit. I was walking through the city back to the dorms when a guy rode up behind me on a bicycle. He was old, had long scraggly gray hair, and a bright red and yellow windsuit on. He rode beside me for a second, stared, and then yelled, "Miss, your pants are hot! What?" And then rode away into the sunset. It was so random and hilarious. Every time I wore those pants, my friends would run up behind me and yell, "Your pants are what?" Something I overheard as two kids walked past our caravan park site. There's a rumbling boom of distant thunder. I like thunder. It sounds like a 200-year-old dog who's retired and helps old people who are blind get around. Kid number 2 doesn't respond. You know? But why is it retired? Because it's old. But it's still helping blind people. Apparently the first kid had no answer for that. Just the other day, checking out at the Cracker Barrel, the older gentleman ringing up my wife accidentally said, with all confidence, "Have a thank you." Sounds like the poor guy just mixed up his catchphrases. Not so much said to me as overheard. Walking down the street with my fiance after dinner, a man and a woman passed by us. Very clearly, I heard the man say, "And that's the second time I got crabs. I just keep a special little comb at the house now, just in case." I'm not sure of any particulars and have thought about that interaction often. So many questions. I know they heard me laugh though. I hope this wasn't like a first date he was on or something. I used to be a smoker. One time, a scruffy-looking man asked me for a light. I told him I only had matches. It was very windy. He said, "That's okay, there's a trick to it. You light the match and then suck down real hard. You get a mouthful of sulfur that way, but you gotta have a trick when you're going 30 miles an hour on top of the tank." I once was canoeing with my fiance for the first time, and we were having a bit of trouble at first getting a rhythm going. So we were along the edge of the water hitting the canal. This random couple was walking along the wall, and the guy said to his wife while pointing at us, "Canoeing, the truest test of love." My fiance and I burst into laughter for 20 minutes, and then finally got our rhythm together. That guy sounds like he's been where you are. "You and your sister look exactly alike." My sister was adopted from Asia. I'm so white I freckle instead of tan. I just about died of laughter because the woman actually meant it. For context, she'd met my sister a couple weeks before, but I hadn't been there, and she'd mistaken me for my sister. I'm as white as a fluorescent light bulb and my foster daughter is black. Of course, I introduce her as my daughter when we're out. Some people would be like, "She's your daughter?" I would pull her closer and point back and forth to our faces and say, "We're practically twins, can't you tell?" That usually got people to laugh. I was at a 50th wedding anniversary party and there were lots of elderly people in attendance. An old man was standing next to me and said, "It looks like a graveyard in here." I literally spit my beer out. We were outdoors. The kicker was the guy was close to the same age as everyone else. I'm in the bathroom at work washing my hands, and one of the professors that I don't think I've ever actually spoken to comes in and starts washing her lanyard in the sink. I try to make small talk with work people even though I suck at it. So I try to strike up a conversation that goes down as follows. "Morning. I spilled coffee on my lanyard and now it's all sticky." Wow, that's the worst. At this point, she turns off the faucet and looks at me completely deadpan, with eyes that said she wanted to feed me my own innards, and said, "I think genocide is worse." So I awkwardly mumbled, yeah, okay, bye, have a nice day, and quickly escaped. It's turned into a running joke in my office now, though. Anything from the printer being out of toner to a fire drill on a cold day is literally worse than genocide. Why did she have to take it to such an extreme? You're just trying to make casual conversation. I watched a guy walking to class at my college years ago saying, "Get the hell out of my way," to a pigeon standing in his path. The pigeon quickly waddled off to the side. I was doing tech support over the phone for an internet company at a call center. I got a call from an elderly woman whose internet had stopped working. After checking that the modem was working and that there were no issues in her area, I was scheduling a visit from one of our technicians, when she suddenly says, "Oh, I know what happened. The cat was playing around the router yesterday." Right, you think it took a cable or something? "No, he probably took away the Wi-Fi." You mean like he moved the router? "No, "Oh no, he probably took the airwaves of the Wi-Fi. You know how cats see things we can't. He surely saw the Wi-Fi signal, grabbed it, and took it away." It took all my willpower to finish the call and not laugh in her face. Yeah, sometimes it's easier to just let things go than to try and explain. I was crossing the street once and my sunglasses fell off my shirt directly to the floor. I just realized it had happened after I got to the other side of the street and my mom pointed it out. The closest car was pretty far away, but I was still very anxious about it. I ran back into the middle of the street and tried to grab it, but was so nervous it fell out of my hands 2 times before I finally got it and ran to the other side of the street again. The car finally reaches us and the driver stops, rolls down the windows and says, "That's what I call survival instinct," and drives away. I laughed so hard. Years ago, when queuing up for movie tickets with my family, the attendant asked the ages of our 4 kids to see if they could all get children's price tickets. I announced their ages 7, 9, 11, and 13. Without missing a beat, the stranger behind us declared, "That's an odd group." Don't worry, they'll even out next year. My friend and I, both female, used to go to the Saturday market to buy fruit and veg. My friend is quite shy towards other people. I had just bought 2 huge watermelons and was carrying them, 1 arm each. As a guy walked past us, he shouted, "You got nice big melons." Didn't say anything else, just kept walking. My friend was shocked, and I almost peed myself laughing so much. First day in basic training. All hell had broken loose. It was just screaming and confusion. I had an instructor come up to me with another kid in tow and yell, "Trainee, do you know where the latrine is? I want to escort this trainee to the latrine so he can go sick himself in the proper facilities." I didn't know where they were, but figured I'd give it my best shot. So myself and this kid walk outside. I look over at him and he's greenish, kind of whimper crying and hunched over. We take 2 steps outside when he pops. Projectile vomit all over the ground. A huge mess. I look up and see an even bigger, scarier instructor rounding the corner about 15 feet in front of us. He walks up, looks the kid in the eye, and with an icy hatred says, "What did you just do to my ground? Do you really hate my ground so much you'd sick yourself on it? I want you to apologize to my ground and then clean yourself up." I nearly lost it. The kid whimpered out a, "Sorry I puked on you ground," and we were on our way. In college, this one girl in the front of the room chimes in on something and mentioned that her eyes change color depending on the summer every year, from blue to green. This black dude in the back of the class whispers to his friend, "Yeah, and I turn white in the winter." I had to remove myself immediately before I made a scene from laughing so hard. I was rollerblading down a hill too fast and landed on my butt. Painful, sure, but not excruciatingly so. An old man walked by and said in the most jolly voice, "Is your behind okay, young lady?" I was shaking of laughter. My behind was okay, yes. I'm a hostess at a restaurant and my coworker was holding the door open for this table of 4 very old black women. And this woman who had just celebrated her 102nd birthday says to her friend, "Can you imagine that? Never thought I'd see the day a white boy holds the door open for us. Oh, if I was younger, I'd have to make my way to you, young man." When I was around 10, my dad took my brother and me to a Sox game at Fenway. We got to the park and I was putting mustard on a hot dog from one of those mustard box push-down nozzle things. This random guy next to me goes, "Yeah, buddy, lather it up." 10-year-old me thought it was about the funniest thing I'd ever heard, and I still chuckle when I think about it as an adult. I'm at a festival and sitting around a campfire when a very intoxicated man kept saying, "I need to borrow your fireplace." He wouldn't let it go, despite being right by the fire. Turns out he needed a lighter for his cigarette and was so drunk that he forgot what it was called. My laughter was not internal. I died laughing right in front of him. I was riding the public bus in Vegas about 13 years ago. I'm sitting kind of in the middle. There's this guy sitting kind of towards the front, having an extremely animated conversation with another guy next to him. The other guy looks like he's barely acknowledging what animated guy is saying. We get to a stop and animated talker guy gets up, but other guy doesn't. It was then that I realized that they weren't together, and that this dude was just talking in a semi-crazy way to some rando dude on the bus. But Animated Talker doesn't want to get off. He wants the other guy to acknowledge that he was right about something. The other guy is just nodding and trying to get on with his life. But this lunatic just kept yammering away. There gets to be some audible grumbling from the other riders because this dude is now holding up the bus. He finally goes to get off. The dude almost makes it to the sidewalk when he does an about face, gets back on the bus, and yells out, "And another thing!" At that second, nearly everyone on the bus yelled the guy to get off. He obviously wasn't expecting it, as he kind of recoiled and skittered away. The guy does this awkward half-run thing directly into a psychiatrist's office. It was at this moment that an older gruff guy who was sitting in the back and quietly reading a newspaper this entire time pipes up and says, "Going to see the psychiatrist, go figure." Everyone on the bus, including myself, just busted out laughing. Not to me, but I was nearby. I was in a supermarket in the fruit and veg section. Two women were arguing behind me. One says, "We should get this." The other responds, "No, we're getting this one. It's better, I should know." The first, sounding upset, says, "Yeah, but..." The other interrupts and says, "You know I was a chef. I worked at KFC." I had to go 2 aisles over so they didn't hear me howling with laughter. I don't think it counts as a chef if you work at KFC. You're not really making food. You're just kind of heating it up. I was walking to class the other day and walked by 2 girls FaceTiming their friend, and I hear this. "Oh my god, we saw y'all broke up. What happened?" "He drank directly out of my Brita water filter." If I heard that just walking past me, there's no way I'd be able to contain myself. Little girl to me after I explain my service dog helps me when I'm sick. "Oh, so he's your dog tour." Me trying to keep a straight face. Yes, exactly. Kids got the puns, I gotta say. I never would have thought of that. When I served, I had a table of about 20 Asian people. The head of the group shook my hand and introduced himself as Tony the tiger. He tried to sound cool and tough, but all I could think of was the cereal mascot. How are you going to name yourself after a cereal mascot and try and take yourself seriously? Come on, buddy. Not me, but one of my customers. He's doing a finishing job for a billionaire in the city, when the designer insists that they use booties or shoe covers. He said he just had his men take their shoes off at the door. Billionaire woman responds, "Peter, their socks on my carpet is like your penis in my vagina. Disgusting." Funniest thing I've heard in a while. That's gotta be one of the harshest burns I've heard in a while. I have a 5.5-pound Chihuahua. He's about as intimidating as a bunny rabbit. I was walking him on the grass along the road. A couple of walkers were coming near me, and my dog started barking at them, so I picked him up. The guy says, "Thank you for picking him up. We were so scared." On the L in Chicago, a group of older guys with shoe shine kits gets off at a stop. One of them drops a small bag of white powder that I presume to be illegal. Another younger guy bends down, picks it up, and tells the guy, "You dropped this." Older guy grabs the baggie and the doors close. Young guy looks at me and says, "I don't know why I did that." I still laugh about it. The young guy was just trying to be polite, and it overrode any other warning signals. I actually did something very similar when I found a couple in the staircase here in my building heating something up in a spoon with a lighter. As soon as I opened the door, they immediately just tried to take off, but they left another lighter sitting on the stairs. I called out to them to come back and handed them their lighter. I knew exactly what they were doing. I don't know why I still felt the need to be polite. What was your "I was only gone X minutes, what the heck happened" story? One night I was on my own and decided to make a nice meal for myself. I spent about half an hour preparing and baking a delicious chicken breast with sun-dried tomatoes and brie cheese. So I got everything ready, set up my dinner and my beer on the coffee table, and sat down to eat and watch some TV. At this point, my cat waltzes in and sat on the couch next to me. Then he dropped something out of his mouth next to me. I turned to look at it, and it was a snake. Okay, no big deal. It's not a big one. So I got up and grabbed some snake wrangling tools, a dustpan and brush, and scooped this little guy up. I walked out the front door and tossed the snake back into the bushes, hoping the cat won't go after it again. I was gone for about 15 seconds. I came back inside and my dinner was gone. The cat was under the table, hunched over a half-eaten chicken breast and growling every time I came near. And that's the first time my cat distracted me with a snake in order to steal my dinner. I was gonna say, this literally sounds like the cat plotted this out to get your food. I left my 2-year-old twins for 2 minutes. They were happily glued to the TV, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to sneak to the kitchen and finish making my coffee. They continued being quiet, and I found it strange, as they normally come and follow me when I leave the room. I came back, and there was soil scattered all over my carpet. One was feeding the other a plant. It was our first baby. My wife had never left our little girl, but decided to run an errand, leaving me, Dad, alone with her. I assured my wife all would be well in her short absence. The kid is sleeping in my arms. All is quiet. I give my wife a kiss and she heads out the door. I walk back to the sofa with the sleeping kid. Notice the kid could probably use a diaper change. I set the baby on the changing table, I take off the old diaper, and the baby wakes up and proceeds to erupt with a volcano of projectile diarrhea. It's all over me, the changing table, the wall. I'm now panicking. I pick up the baby, who's still hemorrhaging an unending spray of baby turd mist. I take her to the kitchen sink and flip on the water. The water's still cold, so when I set the baby in the sink, the baby starts screaming like a demon. My wife opens the door. She forgot her purse. Poop all over the walls and floor. Desperate poop-covered husband wrestling with desperate freezing poop-covered baby. My wife was gone maybe 90 seconds, max. Back in 2008, when everyone was getting $600 tax rebate checks in the mail, I left mine unopened on my coffee table. Went to use the restroom, and when I got back, I saw the envelope chewed in half, and my dog nowhere to be seen. Somehow, my miniature Dachshund puppy got up on the coffee table, picked through all my other mail to find this specific one, chew it up, and run under the bed, all in about 1 minute. I had to tell the IRS that my dog chewed up my rebate check, which was funny. First day of summer break after grade 7, I went to a skate park with a few friends and one of their dads drove us all. He went to get a coffee and said, "Don't break anything until I get back." And I did not listen. I went down a quarter pipe and broke both my radius and ulna on my first try. He got back and I was sitting on a bench holding my crooked arm. At that point, he's gotta just laugh when he comes back, right? Like, he totally called it. When my daughter was around 3.5, I picked her up from daycare on my way home from work, walked in the door, and set her down in the living room to play while I put the mail I had grabbed on the way into the house on the table in the kitchen, which was less than 10 feet away. I dropped the mail on the kitchen table, turned around, and walked back into the living room, and she's butt naked. It was literally less than 5 seconds. I'm still amazed when I think about it. I can't even get my shoes off that fast. Sounds like maybe she was just trying to play a prank on you. Comcast and FedEx both left a "just missed you" at my door when I was gone for 5 minutes to shower, during the latter quarter of a 5 to 6 hour time frame. Yeah, we've all been there for this one. I experienced being hunted by a tow truck in Chicago. A friend and I were delivering a couple big monitors to his apartment. We pulled around behind the building, but he didn't have the key for the back door. So we quickly ran around front and came out the back door of his apartment to see the car gone. Like, not going, or the tow truck loading up the car. It was gone. We couldn't have taken more than 90 seconds. Wow, those repo guys are pretty slick, huh? I grew up in the country. One day in high school, I came home, made myself a snack, and then went back outside to eat my snack on the deck. When I got home, the yard was empty. When I came back out, there was a zebra in the yard. And that's how we found out the new neighbors ran an exotic animal petting zoo, and that they weren't very good at it. They lived there for a couple of years, and we got really nonchalant about that zebra getting out. My grandma came to visit once and came in all in a tizzy about it. I think it was even more shocking when our response was basically, "That darn zebra again." I was in middle school. I went to the bathroom because the lesson was boring me out of my mind. You know, I was 12. And I stayed there for around 10 minutes. When I returned to class, I saw 2 cops dragging 2 of my classmates. They were handcuffed and visibly terrified. Found out sometime later that they were arrested for drugs. And the cops came in the class and handcuffed them right there. The cops heard you were bored and came to put on a show. Too bad you weren't there to see it. I was boiling water on an electric stovetop. Seemed safe enough. Left for 30 seconds. Came back and the entire stove was on fire with 2-foot flames. Someone had let some oily food fall between the burner and the tin foil we keep underneath. Another 30 seconds and the kitchen would have caught fire. I live above the pizza place that I work at. I'm also full-time in college. Last night, they called me in for just an hour or two to help close. No big deal. After a full school day and going into work for a bit, I was exhausted. I walked upstairs and into my apartment. There was new decorations everywhere, my furniture was gone, and my bedroom door was open. I screamed, "Holy crap!" and kicked open the door to see who was in my room. I was only gone for an hour. How could someone move in and move all of my stuff? As I made contact with the girl lying in bed watching Netflix, I realized I was on the second floor, not the third floor. The apartment below me has the exact same layout as mine, and this girl happened to have her door unlocked like I usually leave mine. We have multiple roommates. I simply said, "Oops, wrong room," and ran back to my room. I'm going to go down today and apologize for scaring that poor girl half to death at 11 p.m. I went to work one day. I literally lived right across the street from my job, so I walked to work each day. By the time I got to work, my boss told me I needed to go back home. It was an emergency. Apparently my power had been cut off. My stepdad had flipped out and scared the crap out of my siblings, and apparently attempted to hurt my pregnant mom. Apparently the power department came out and cut off our power due to non-payment of bills. My stepdad started screaming and cussing about it, which scared my siblings. My mom got into an argument with him, telling him to calm down and demanding to know why the power was cut off. He revealed that instead of paying our bills, he'd been blowing all of the money. This led to more arguing. Stepdad got angrier and started choking my mom, which is when my siblings called my job to have me come home. I had to fight him off. We all got out of the house, went back across the street, and called the cops. This was before cell phones were common. The cops come out about 45 minutes later, question us, take pictures of the marks on my mom's neck, then go question stepdad. The cops come back, escort us out of the house, tell us to pack our bags, and for us to leave. Stepdad gets to stay in the house, even though he wasn't on the lease. They don't arrest him and tell us we can't come back until my mom has a restraining order against him. We leave and stay with my aunts, and it takes 2 weeks to get a restraining order. Only then are we allowed back in the house, and by then he's trashed most of our stuff. Nothing was ever done to him except the cops finally made him leave. Wow, this is probably one of the most intense and scary versions of this kind of story. I was working on my senior chemistry project in college. I brought samples down to the NMR room for analysis. I forgot something upstairs, ran up to grab it, came back down, and found a metal folding chair stuck to the instrument. An NMR is similar to an MRI machine in that it's a gigantic sensitive magnet that metal should never be near. In this time I went upstairs, another student thought she left a sample probe in the instrument, couldn't eject the probe, and brought the chair over to look down into the instrument to find it. The chair got stuck to the instrument and she had to find my professor to remove it. Luckily, the magnet did not quench upon chair removal. Yeah, this could have been a very expensive mistake. A little over a year ago, my now husband and I were prepping for a move and needed to take a handful of garbage bags to the dumpster in our apartment community. We patted each of our 2 small dogs on the head and headed out. Less than 5 minutes later, we come back. Both of the dogs meeting us at the door with wagging tails and big smiles. All seems perfect until we round the corner into the dining room. One of the dogs had pooped clear up 2 walls, about 4.5 feet up and 6 feet wide worth of wall. I was laughing too hard to clean it up. My husband saved the day and cleaned it up for me. But with such force and distance, we can only imagine the absolutely gut-wrenching noise that dog had to have made when it did its big business. Yeah, that's one where I would probably prefer that it happened when I wasn't in the room. I left the mail rooms to go get my wipes to clean off the scanner glass. Was gone about 3 minutes. Came back to find the entire mailroom coated in toner, and a toner-covered coworker just standing there looking confused and alarmed. I didn't even ask. I just went to go get our boss to deal with it. I can only imagine how much of a pain it was to clean all of that up. Not gone per se, but asleep. I was flying LAX to SFO. My flight was delayed about 5 hours, so I did what any sensible frequent traveler does. I went to the club lounge and drank as much free bourbon as they would allow. We finally boarded the plane. I was in one of the first groups because, again, I fly a lot. So by the time we take off, I'm fast asleep. The captain comes on the intercom and says, "Don't panic, seatbelts on, etc." Drunkenly, I look out the window to see some smoke. And holy crap, there's smoke in the cabin? The lady next to me explains we've only been in the air 10 minutes and are about to make an emergency landing in Santa Barbara. Yeah, I'm sure that's a scary moment to wake up to. I fell asleep on the couch for like 10 minutes, I swear. Woke up to mayhem. 2 toddlers had scribbled all over the walls. The younger one had begun scribbling with crayon, and the older one, 3, became upset he was breaking the rules. So she grabbed a pencil and began marking giant X's as large as she could make. "You can't draw here, or here, or here." I woke up to the entire first floor covered in pencil X's and crayon scribbles everywhere. I have a 2-year-old. The other day, I ran to the bathroom and he was sitting down, pacified with Daniel Tiger and homemade trail mix. I came back, probably 2 minutes later, to find a mushroom cloud of flour and him standing on top of a bookshelf with a closed jar of peanut butter and covered in flour. Sounds like he was trying to make a sandwich or something. Several years ago, I was in the process of making dinner and had left a plate of flour tortillas on the kitchen bar. Went out to the garage with my husband for about 90 seconds to look at something. I hear a very loud thud from the kitchen. That thud was our dog jumping down off the bar, and he was now standing in the middle of the kitchen, wolfing down flour tortillas like they were going out of style. What makes it funny is that our bar is about 42 inches high, and the dog was a basset hound. A frickin' fat, stubby-legged basset hound. To this day, we still can't figure out how he got up there, or how he got down without breaking a leg. Hey, if a dog smells food, it'll find a way. Back in grade 11, I had my friend and his girlfriend come over to hang out on a night that my parents weren't home. The worst part was that we weren't drinking. We were all playing Mario Party. I got up and went to the bathroom for literally 30 seconds. I come back and they're completely naked and screwing on my bed. That's just rude. I actually have that moment to my friends. I was outside at a house party and needed to pee. There was someone in the bathroom, so I told my friends I was going to go around the side of the house to pee where no one could see. A few minutes later, I come back all bloody and dirty, and they're freaking out. What I didn't know was there was a steep ditch right next to the house. Being a female, if I pee outside, I try to support myself by doing a sort of wall sit so I don't wind up peeing on my legs or clothes. So I pulled down my pants and tried to do the wall sit on the side of the house. I was crazy drunk, so I lost my balance due to the incline of the ditch. I scraped myself up on the brick wall trying to catch myself, and tumbled pants down in the ditch. I pulled myself up, went back to my friends and said, "I think it's time for me to go home." This happened just last night. After putting the kids to bed and having a bit of a workout, my wife told me to shower off and get to the bedroom. I jumped in the shower, scrubbed up, rinsed, and was out in a matter of minutes. She was already asleep. There's nothing more fun than trying to go to sleep once the launch sequence has been initiated. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Years back, I had a little thing celebrating my new apartment. Just a few close friends and a couple of not so close friends. We're having a good time, drinks were being had, and eventually the need for greasy takeout food was too strong to ignore. Everyone was pretty marinated, some more than others, but driving was out of the question. Me and my bro take everyone's orders and we stroll to the taco place around the corner. When we return, most everyone is on the porch having smokes. Everything seemed normal. When I walk into the apartment, there he is, we'll call him Waldo, passed out on my couch. Vomit running down the side of his face, vomit dripping down my new couch, vomit on my brand new rug. Apparently, when we left, they started chugging whiskey, which obviously didn't agree with old Waldo. I only went for tacos. So my wife is pregnant right now. First trimester is pretty exciting. We were at our friend's house and I was helping my bro cook some burgers. My wife was hanging out in the kitchen with my buddy's wife and was holding their baby. I'm walking back and forth between the grill and the kitchen. Get a fork, get a plate, get that seasoning, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm in and out of the kitchen for less than a minute and see my wife puking into their kitchen sink, with the entire front of her clothes covered in baby poop. I guess their baby decided to drop the mother of all poop bombs right in my wife's lap. First trimester, so she's totally sensitive to smells and whatnot, but she totally lost all of her cookies right in front of everyone at our friend's house. I guess the baby was just trying to get her ready for what it's gonna be like. He had good intentions. That Super Bowl where Janet Jackson was topless. Well, lucky me, I had to pee right before the halftime fiasco because it was getting really boring. As I'm peeing, everybody starts screaming and hooting, and I had a mini heart attack and peed on the back of the toilet. Now, anytime I feel myself get bored, I think about that day, and it forces me to stick through the boredom in case there's suddenly boobies. My girls were like 4 and 6 years old. One summer evening, I left them at home with their dad while I ran to the store to pick up a few things. I couldn't have been gone more than an hour. When I pull into the driveway and get out of the car, I can hear both girls screaming and their dad roaring. I sigh and straighten my shoulders and walk into the house, braced for whatever disaster is awaiting me. I go through the front door, round the corner, and see my husband lying in the hallway holding his head. His roars have subsided to a painful groaning. I hear scuffling behind the girls' closed bedroom door. I step over my husband's prone form and burst into the bedroom to catch the girls in the process of climbing out their bedroom window. I got everyone settled down and finally got the story out of them. It seems my husband thought it would be hilarious to scare the girls. So he got out the scream mask, put it on, and tiptoed down the hallway. He stuck his head through the half-open door, and before he could make any scary sound, the 6-year-old glanced up and saw him, and immediately leapt to her feet and slammed the door, pinning his head. When he recoiled from that impact, he staggered backward, cracking the back of his head on our bedroom doorframe and collapsed to the floor. The girls were planning to escape next door. The moral of the story is don't mess with defenseless little girls. Sometimes they'll mess you up. You know what? I'd be pretty darn proud of my little girls in this situation. Baby powder everywhere. I'm talking in the silverware drawer, under the couch, inside the couch, on top of the picture frames. It clogged and broke the vacuum. I slipped on a thin layer of it trying to get the vacuum out of the closet. Baby powder on tile is very dangerous. I hate baby powder. I wanted to try tattooing. I bought a gun and was practicing on some oranges and stuff. I had some friends come over and one of them volunteered to get a simple little bomb done on him. I did it and it turned out good. I went out for a smoke break for 5 minutes and then came back in to the rest of the guys tattooing themselves with the same needle. One of them tattooed a circle on their arm by literally holding it like a child holds a crayon and just did overlapping circles. And the other tattooed his ex-wife's name across his forearm in a similar fashion. Started okay, but slowly got bigger and worse near the end of the name. Serious WTF moment. Oh, the worst part of that story is them reusing the same needle. That's just a bad idea no matter what. You want to give yourself a stupid tattoo, that's entirely up to you, but at least use a fresh needle. A regular day in the gym. I was working out my back. A couple of guys were doing flat bench and hanging out. I had to go take a leak and was gone for 2 minutes tops. Come back to see one of the guys sporting a pec tear with a spectacular purple bruise blossoming on it. He was crying, practically bawling while a doc tended to him. Turns out, while ego benching, he tried to do 405 and paid the price. I was at work and I went outside to grab a smoke. I come back in and one of the receptionists that I had a crush on is blushing and everyone else is laughing. I ask what happened and they let me know that she got her belly button pierced the night before and wanted to show everyone but was wearing a dress. She decided to flip up her dress to show everyone anyway and forgot that she wasn't wearing any underwear. I wanted my wife to have a good morning, so I made breakfast for her. It was pancakes with her favorite syrup and a glass of orange juice. I thought it would be nice for her to be able to eat it in bed, so I woke her up and brought her the tray. I realized I forgot a napkin, so turn around to go get one. And as soon as I make it out of the room, I hear silverware hitting together and a really sad voice say, "Oh, come back." I turn around and there's orange juice everywhere, pancakes on the bed, and she's looking at me like I did something wrong. Evidently, she'd reached for a Kleenex and her juice started tipping on the tray, and she panicked and overcompensated. Trying to make her day nice made it awful. Story of my wife's life. Well, hey, it was a nice thought, at least you were trying. You can't account for that. What's the most significant "you just messed with the wrong person" moment you've witnessed or experienced? I stopped in Reno overnight while moving across the country. Had everything I own in a little beater I bought for the trip. All night, I'm keeping an eye on the parking lot. There's a cop car in the lot. Sure enough, late that night, I see a shady guy walking slowly along the line of parked cars, scoping them out. To my surprise, he decides the cop car is the one he wants to break into. So he takes off his shirt, wraps it around his arm, and starts hitting the window with his forearm. I call the front desk and let them know what's going on. The lady says she's calling the cops. I tell her it's a cop car he's trying to break into, and ask if there's a cop staying in the hotel. She says that she'll check. About 30 seconds later, a very angry man in his boxers thunders out of his room and tackles the dude. He messed with the wrong person. Why of all the cars would he decide that the cop car was the one to break into? That just sounds like a bad plan from the start. My father recently told me a story about this jerk who he works with driving trucks for different distributors. They have no smoking areas because of food productions and things like that, but this jerk decided to smoke there anyway, putting his butts out in a styrofoam cup. Anyway, after a while, his truck was loaded and he decided to just throw the cup out the window after getting his truck, when a man walked past and asked him calmly to pick up the cup and put it in the bin. To which this intellectual giant of a driver says, "If it's so important, why don't you put it in the bin?" before driving off. Without making much of a reaction, he picked it up, walked to the bin, then makes his way back inside. When my father gets back to the main truck depot, he sees this driver getting yelled at by his boss. Turns out there was a conference being held with some overseas members of the company and the CEO. The CEO whom was told to pick up the cup. They instantly barred the driver from the site and all associated sites, and my father's boss had to jump through hoops to not lose the contract renewal. I can't imagine the level of ecstasy that CEO would have felt during the whole situation, knowing that this prick doesn't know who he is. When I was a senior in high school, I was at some house party. There was this chick named Rachel there, a notoriously crazy girl who was known for causing trouble anywhere she went. She was also a pretty big girl, maybe 5'9" with broad shoulders. Anyway, out of nowhere, she just starts screaming at another girl, Sarah, a shorter, skinny thing, who was honestly on the other side of the room doing absolutely nothing. Rachel gets up in her face, starts cussing her out, and pushing her multiple times, obviously just trying to start something for the heck of it. Rachel finally decides to throw a punch, and I kid you not, like a flash of lightning, Sarah just launches at Rachel, starts beating the crap out of her face, knocks her on her butt, and strongholds Rachel's hair and starts slamming her skull on the brick fireplace in the house. I think she must have knocked Rachel out for a minute, because Sarah decided she was done and just stood up and walked away. Turns out Sarah's older sister was a competitive female boxer and showed her a thing or two about fighting. Lesson learned: just because they're small doesn't mean they can't beat the crap out of you. There's this old, miserable looking man with a nickel who seems to just ride the subway all day. The nickel man only seems to have one purpose in his life. He sticks out his hand with a nickel on his palm and he just points it at you. It's like he's asking for you to look at his plain old nickel. He's like a reverse panhandler. One night, I was coming home drunk and saw the nickel guy. He was doing his usual rounds and he came to me. He stuck out his hand and like usual, you just let him be. But I was tipsy and I pulled the nickel out of his hand. Within seconds, he went from normal nickel guy to crazy rip your face off yelling angry gorilla man. Once I put it back, he became normal nickel guy again. I was mortified. The nickel's obviously very important to him. He just wants to show it off. One night during my junior year of high school, some of my buddies came by and asked if I wanted to go party with them. I didn't know the person throwing the party, but I said screw it and went with them anyway. It turned out to be one of the most surreal nights of my life. We got there and only knew a handful of people out of the 50 or so people that were there. There were a lot of people from different schools, so I knew that eventually something was going to happen. Soon after, one kid, we'll call him Ron, pulls out a piece and starts bragging about how his parents bought it for him and no one should mess with him. Then he starts pointing it at people to show off the laser sight on it. The guy throwing the party, we'll call him John, saw this and told him to stop pointing it at people. Ron said something like, "Screw off, don't tell me what to do, I do what I want." It got a little heated, but then it all seemed to get worked out and Ron put it away. About 5 minutes later, Ron had the piece out again, and trying to be slick and prove he was a bad boy, pointed it right at John's back. When he did, John just happened to turn and saw Ron pointing it at him. I don't remember his exact words, but John said something to the effect of, "Oh, you want to mess with me? I'll be right back." He started jogging to the house. We were in the front yard. And I told my friends, we need to leave. This is about to get crazy. While John was jogging to the house and while he was inside, Ron seemed confident at first. But then he realized he'd gotten himself in a terrible situation and started to walk quickly to his car. John was not far behind, however, with a much bigger piece of his own. Ron got to his car and got in, but he was blocked in and couldn't move. John walked up to the car and tapped on the window. Ron cracked the window about an inch and was crying, probably begging for his life, all while John calmly talked to him. I couldn't hear what was said, but I did hear John finally say, "Stop crying, you look like a real wuss." He started to walk away, but then all of a sudden he stopped, turned around, and fired at Ron's face from about 8 to 10 feet away. We all thought for sure that we had just witnessed a murder and scattered like roaches when you turned the lights on. I remember looking back and seeing John calmly walking back into the house while everyone was running around him. That was what freaked me out the most. His calmness. Turns out Ron lived, and John was charged with attempted murder and a few other things. Ron had reconstructive surgery to repair some of the damage, but he was badly disfigured. I don't remember if John was found guilty or not, but I do remember hearing that Ron won a settlement from John's family. He bought a new Cadillac and whatever else he wanted. But he was super depressed about his disfigured face and got hammered constantly. He died in a single car drunk driving accident not too long after. I'll never forget that night. That got insanely out of control. Those are not toys. You don't just wave them around. And you definitely don't use them unless it is absolutely necessary. I live in front of a hospital parking lot. Some guy in an expensive car cut in line. A lady in a van was super peeved and kept honking. He got out to calm her down. She got out, ripped off her wig, and started screaming and pointing at the cancer center entrance. He looked like he wet himself and got back in his car. Still stayed where he cut in line though. My father and his brother, who were both 6'6", were riding in my uncle's tiny little Chevette, and a guy got road rage and chased them into a parking lot. You could almost see the guy fill his pants when they unfolded themselves out of the car. My dad always tells me this story of how you should never get out of your car after a road rage incident. My mom and him were driving to the city when another driver didn't give my dad the right of way. He almost crashed into my parents, and my mom was pregnant at the time. So of course my dad was angry out of his mind. My dad, being a pretty big dude, wasn't exactly someone to mess with, but out of the little car that almost crashed into my parents, got a man that my dad described as a freaking giant. Dad quickly got back in the car and kept driving. He always gets embarrassed when he tells the story, because my mom still laughs at the face he made when that giant got out of his tiny car. Two drunk guys were bugging this local busker, trying to get him to fight them, saying all sorts of racist stuff. The busker was black. The busker just lost it. Obviously, he had to deal with a ton of drunk jerks. He picked up his guitar and hit one of the drunk guys across the face with it. I called the police when I saw it, and later got called in to give evidence against the drunk guys, who got arrested, saying that they started it. I mean, hey, you got what you asked for. I was covering a hockey game as a sports reporter when I saw the single best retaliation of my life. In my state, if you're female and you want to play hockey with the boys, you can. Typically, the serious girl hockey players will play in these leagues because the girls-only hockey leagues are kinda crap. There was this girl named Alex who I covered since she was a freshman, and she was really good. She'd played since she was a kid, was on some really good travel teams, competed in national camps, got a college scholarship for the sport, and played 4 years in college. Anyway, during her junior year, I'm covering an away game at this crappy arena, and her school is playing one of its rivals, so I know it's gonna be a chippy game. It did not disappoint. This big tough boy notices she's a girl, or had played against her before, and spends the first 2 periods basically trying to intimidate her by checking her hard into the boards whenever she has the puck, and generally doing all the things you know someone is doing to antagonize you. Now, I've seen this girl play, and I know she isn't gonna tolerate that, so I just sit and wait for the moment that she snaps. It comes in the 3rd period. The jerk comes running full speed from one side of the ice to the other and gives her one of the worst cheap shot checks I've ever seen. She hits the boards hard, lands on the ice, and the crowd yells because the refs either didn't see it or didn't care, and the play breaks the other way, so everyone else is moving away from them. She doesn't miss a beat though. Calmly, I watch her pick herself up, and the jerk hockey player must have said something to her to cause her to snap, because she takes her helmet off and goes his way. At this point, I can tell he thinks he's going to dismiss this sweet little girl and tell her to play with dolls or something, but he never gets the chance. She socks him right in the jaw and starts beating the crap out of him. It was absolutely amazing. He must have had maybe 50 pounds on her, but she didn't care and beat his butt handily. And because the refs were on the other side of the ice, it took a little bit of time to break them up. She got ejected, he got ejected, but he sulked out of the arena knowing full well he got his butt kicked by a girl. It was phenomenal. 2 kids about 11 years old were bullying this 9-year-old kid by instigating their little sister to go hit and kick him, with the threat that they would beat him up with a hockey stick if he retaliated. The poor 9-year-old pleaded with them to stop, but when they wouldn't, he charged the kid with the hockey stick, took it from him, chased them off, and threw the stick over the fence, then continued to saunter home. I witnessed this from about 50 feet away at age 13. It took place in about a minute, and while I was contemplating a way to help the kid out, he just took matters into his own hands like a G. That kid was not one to mess with. When I was about 10 or so, there was a cricket in my house that I shot with a Nerf gun from a prone position. It dodged it, then jumped at me, and I got up in a panic so fast, the gun flung from my hand into the kitchen, breaking a few glasses. I never messed with crickets again. Didn't you know? Crickets are vicious, dude. I was working in a sketchy part of Albuquerque when I realized a guy was following me through the parking lot. I started walking faster and so did he. I knew I wasn't going to get to my car before he reached me, so I took a knife out of my purse and turned around and shoved it in his face and yelled, "I'm from Wisconsin, I can gut a deer." The dude took off and I got in my car shaking. That's a really scary moment. I'm glad you were able to defend yourself and got away safely. I lost it at a Subway a while back. This story isn't about me losing it at a person myself, but I found someone who could and did. The Subway I go to is inside a skating rink, and on this day, it was flooded with newly pubescent boys thinking that treating people like absolute crap is how you act like a macho man. One girl behind the counter was near tears, and the other woman was trying to hold her own ground against a bunch of around 13-year-olds. It was stuff like, "You witch, I didn't ask for mayo. Are you blind? For crap's sake, that's not toasted enough. When I get a job, I'm gonna be making more than you." Just a taste of some of what I heard. So I went out to the lobby of the skating rink and found a woman nearby and asked her if she was with the boys in Subway, which she was, and then I told her to follow me. The look on the boys' faces when she let out her angered screech after listening to them was friggin' priceless. She made the boys pay for their own food. One boy didn't even get to finish making his sandwich, with the woman saying, "Wrap it up how it is and he'll pay for it." And from what I gathered as she practically dragged them out of there was the boys who weren't hers, she was going to speak to their parents, followed by strong protests as she told them to pack their crap, as she was taking them home early. I left the girls at Subway a nice tip and they gave me a cookie. Never mess with an angry mom. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at that moment. That's gotta be the worst kind of jerk there is. The group of 13-year-olds who think they've just got the world figured out and that they're better than you even though they have not accomplished anything. Their kryptonite is their mother, and I love watching that moment. When I played hockey, I got kicked out of a game early, so I had to watch it from the stands. A guy from the other team was chasing one of my teammates around the ice, slashing him, trying to get him to fight. Finally, my buddy dropped his gloves and proceeded to give this dude a man-sized butt whooping. That teammate went on to become an enforcer in the NHL. We're getting a lot of hockey stories today, but I guess that is the one sport where you're technically allowed to fight the other team. After drinking and partying in the haunch outside our base in Japan, my friend and I went to the on-base taxi stand to go back to the barracks. We hail and start climbing into the first open cab we see. This drunken white guy was running for it, but we beat him to it, and we didn't even see him. Anyway, he's furious and starts yelling at us. 2 girls, 1 Latina, the other black. "You stupid friggin' N-word!" And then a group of about 6 black sailors come around the corner to the stand. I don't know how it happened. Maybe Paul Mooney summoned them. Anyway, white guy changed his mind and ends up walking/running to the ships. A fight didn't end up breaking out, but he came really close to getting his butt whooped. I work at a restaurant and 4 punks decided to dine and ditch. They ran out and got away, but luckily I overheard one of their names while they were eating. Long story short, I tracked him down on Twitter, and the direct messages went like this. Me. Haha, nice try. We know who you are. You owe us $40. Bring the money or we're reporting you to the police and your school. You have until Sunday night. 1 minute later. I'm terribly sorry for this horrible incident. I'm bringing the money right now. I'm terribly sorry. It wasn't even my idea. I had no choice but to run also, or else I'm in trouble. We left the bag of money. 15 minutes later after I sent the message, a guy literally opened the front door and threw a Ziploc bag full of $40 of cash and change into the restaurant and ran away. Tools. I bet they thought it was real friggin' funny at the time, too. I work in a law office and regularly have to file documents with the court. I've learned from watching one interaction not to mess with the clerks at the filing window. A lot of people probably don't know or wouldn't believe how detailed the rules are for submitting documents to the court. There are rules regarding the type of paper you can use, the exact spacing of the heading on the paper, the exact measurements of the 2-hole punches at the top of the sheet, all kinds of things. There are literally dozens of rules on how to format your filings. In my experience, these rules are rarely enforced. The clerks will reject documents if there are major errors, missing signatures, or filled out incorrectly, things like that. But will usually let things slide like your 2-hole punches not being precisely 2 3/4 inches apart. But there was one day where I saw a clerk take sweet revenge against someone who had it coming. I was standing in line waiting to file something, and a notoriously huge jerk of an attorney got called up to the window. The clerk asked him something like, "I'm really sorry, Mr. Jerk, but you're missing some attachments to this form." He reacts as if she had just stood from her chair, flipped him the bird, and went and pooped on his mom's grave. He starts yelling about how she didn't know what the heck she was doing, and that a trained monkey could do her job, that he would complain to her supervisor, and on and on and on. He goes stomping away, and she looks much calmer than you would expect for someone who just got reamed out by this enormous jerk. I get called up to her window and say something like, "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that." She replies, "It's fine, he's on my list now." I'm curious, so I ask what she means. Her response was fantastic. She says, "Mr. Jerk handles a lot of family law cases. He'll be wanting to file things here, and his paperwork is bound to land on my desk. For people like him, I get out the formatting sections of the rules of court, and I make sure he's followed every one of them. She points to my filing and says, "Your 2-hole punches look off. You see how one is higher than the other? There's supposed to be a certain distance from the top of the page. I'm not going to reject yours, but next time he drops something off at the filing box, you better believe I'm going to bust out my ruler." I let her know that I think that's awesome. But once he's seen the reason his document was rejected, he'll just have an assistant fix it or whatever. She replies, "We don't have to tell him why it was rejected specifically, just that it violated some rule of formatting. He can figure that out for himself if he ever wants to have another document filed." She looked so happy. This woman has got to be one of the most petty, evil, conniving people I've ever heard of. I want to travel the world with her. What's the quickest you've noped out of a job? It was a shop that refurbished train suspension hydraulics. 40% of the guys were missing at least part of a finger. Maintenance guy was missing 4 on one hand and 1.5 on the other. Half the guys were intoxicated, and the guy training me stormed out halfway through the second day. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna dip now. I'm sure your fingers really appreciate that decision. Many years ago, I worked at a popular sports bar as a line cook. First day, they had me train with a guy who didn't speak English for 2 hours. Not a huge deal. Mostly you observe people in a kitchen and that's how you learn. The owner came back and said she was scheduling me to be alone the next day, which was Super Bowl Sunday. I noped out of there so fast. I left right then and there. I'm willing to bet the person who left that position before you left for the exact same reason. I worked for a newspaper for most of a week. I was expected to use my own laptop and software. No IT, and I'd have to share logins and passwords with 3 other people and guess when they would need them. For me, it was 1 week. It was 1985 and a collections agency was looking for an IT guy. It was basically desktop support on some IBM PCs. It took me a week to realize what a soul-deadening place that was, and I bolted. It was mutual, actually. They saw how I was reacting to some of the techniques the collectors used. The targets were mostly old people who were encouraged to sell family heirlooms and the like to pay off debts. 3 days after my 2-week training, I was supposed to be a seasonal temp worker for a national propane company. The job distribution and training consisted of taking calls off hours for people who wanted refills and acting as a messenger service, referring their contact info to their local store when they opened the next day. Easy peasy. When I got out onto the floor, I found out I was actually expected to be a dispatcher for drivers, and also the first point of contact for all emergency situations. Things I had never been so much as briefed on in training. My first shift, I had to field a call from a local police officer who was on site to a horrific propane truck crash. I got to wake the guy's district manager in the dead of night, tell him his worker was deceased, and the overturned truck was blocking a few lines of the freeway, and the police were trying to get a hold of him. That was just the start. One customer got the smell of garlic and eggs in their house, and I got the call. "What do I do, Mr. Dispatcher?" How would I know? Get out of the house ASAP? Another customer, "The CO detector is going off." I got the call, instead of 911 for some reason. I had zero interest in being an underpaid, not trained emergency dispatcher. It's the only job I took off on without giving a 2-week notice. I was nice enough to finish out my shift on the 3rd day, but that was it. Honestly, you were way too lenient on these guys. That's a serious position to be just dropping you in without the appropriate training. I would have gone a step further and reported them to the proper authorities. Someone needs to be properly trained in that position. You're handling emergencies. You can't afford to just be any old Joe. I went into an office for an interview. They said they had several positions available and I wanted to do some admin stuff. Well, after the interview, they told me to get into a van to do the next part of the process. Turns out we were driving an hour away so I could shadow one of their door-to-door salespeople. They would ask residents to go into their basement to check their hot water heaters to see if they were eligible to replace them with their company's own. I felt pretty uncomfortable about this, and pretty peeved that my whole day was gone doing this. The worst part was the girl I was shadowing spent half the day sitting around in the truck reading magazines, and just waiting for people to come home from work. I was sort of asking questions about the job and she got defensive and said, "Well, I decide if you get this job or not." To which I replied, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to do this." But she kept insisting that it was her who decided if I worked. I don't think she understood that I meant I don't want to do this crap, period. What a waste of a day. Yeah, a lot of companies like this have really sketchy hiring processes, where you think you're applying for one job and then you get dragged out to something like this. I'm sure a lot of people just get an Uber and go home at that point. Found out that the educational assistance they touted in their advertisement applied only to full-time employees, and that they both defined full-time as no fewer than 40 hours and kept anyone that would apply for that assistance from ever being qualified for it. None of this was advertised, and the people I interviewed with assured me, a college student, that working 21 hours a week would get me benefits. Too bad I read my contract before signing it and called them out. Don't lie to your employees, especially during an interview, on something that can be easily and swiftly disproven. If you're willing to lie to me about this, what else are you willing to lie to me about? Mine had to be when I was 18 and working at Blockbuster. I was helping the manager during the before open shift, getting new items stocked on the shelves that came in that morning. My mom called me and told me that my dad was having a heart attack, and she was panicking while waiting for the ambulance. Why did she call me at work to tell me this? The Blockbuster I worked at was in a strip mall type area behind my cul-de-sac. My house and the Blockbuster was separated by a small alley and a 3-minute walk. I told my manager what was happening and asked if I could leave to help my mom while they waited for the ambulance. She said no. I just stood there looking at her, thinking she couldn't be serious. I would be gone for all of 10 minutes and back helping her if needed. She stressed how important it was to get things done that needed to be done, and I could only leave if I called around to the other workers and found someone to come in and cover for me while I was gone. I took off my name tag, slammed it on the counter, and walked out. I never went back for any reason. For any who might wonder, my dad came out fine and was in the hospital for a few days. I was interviewing for a contract position at a very small game development company, and they told me that they were looking for someone to help finish up an existing project. Literally, the game looked like it was made in MS Paint, as if they had just hired some random guy off the street and asked them to make some art for them. Granted, it's a mobile game and sold for the standard 99 cents, so maybe that's not the worst. But the game itself doesn't look engaging at all either. But I figure, worst comes to worst, I could make some money on the side with some low effort. Then they told me that my pay would be a percentage of the sales. Noped right out of that one. I was pretty well qualified, but between jobs and receiving financial support, I get an interview with a small company. I'm looking forward to earning some money again. The boss/interviewer is a huge jerk. At one point, he asks me if I feel guilty that people like him are supporting me. I politely inform him that he'll have to support me a bit longer while I find a suitable job. I tell him that the interview is over, but thanks for your time. I went for a trial shift with a door-to-door sales company. The guy I was partnered up with told me that if he didn't make above the target sales, he was coming out with the equivalent of £3 per hour, which in the UK is well below minimum wage. This was a commission-only, self-employed role. Noped all the way home that day. Here's another example, guys. Just avoid that door-to-door stuff. It's never good for you as the worker. I worked in a bakery. It was my first day, so I get there in the morning to meet everyone. Then they have me grease up the baking trays for the others to fill. I lift up the first tray and like 10 to 15 cockroaches just scatter everywhere from under the tray. I tell the guy showing me the work that there were cockroaches, and he just shrugged. This was all in the back store. Customers were 10 feet away. So I tell the guy I'm not feeling too well after about an hour of doing that, and I head to the bathroom. When I come out, I told him I couldn't do that job, and he told me to get a real job then. So I left and got myself a proper job. I hope you called the health inspector too, 'cause that's just gross. I had an interview at what I thought was a regular steakhouse in a new town I had just moved to. The interview went well. It was just before the restaurant opened, so it was pretty empty. At the end, a waitress starting her shift walked by in buttless chaps and a thong. Turns out that was their uniform. The manager called like 30 minutes later saying I got the job. I had to politely decline that one. Back in college, I used to work part-time as a nanny. One summer, I landed a really sweet-sounding 40-hour-a-week Monday to Friday nannying job, looking after a baby and toddler. I was super excited about all the money I was going to make working that many hours. But the weird thing about this job was that the unemployed dad was also going to be at home with me. He was supposed to be spending all his time looking for a job, and I was watching after the kids while the wife was at work. Literally that first week, on day 2 or 3, he starts hinting about his marriage problems and how his wife sleeps on the couch. The next day, he asks me to try out his fancy new massage chair. I reluctantly agreed, and he just stared at me while I laid on this vibrating chair and was like, "Oh yeah, nice. Great, thanks." He then offered to give me an actual massage sometime, and maybe I wouldn't mind giving him one too. On Friday afternoon, I went home, told my parents who I was living with for the summer everything, and my mom called the guy and told him I wasn't coming back the following Monday, or ever. He then sent me a text message saying he was disappointed in me. Ugh, and his poor wife. This guy just sounds like a total creep. You definitely dodged a bullet on this one. It was my first day working for a family business that had just bought the equipment necessary to install underground fiber optic lines. They had previously been realtors, but had read an article in an entrepreneur's magazine that said $1 million a year gross was common. They pulled their 14 and 17-year-olds out of school to act as laborers, and the mom and dad were going to run separate crews. I was their first employee hire. As I was setting up my bore path, the mom told me we didn't need to expose an electrical line. We would just drill a few feet underneath it, and we didn't need to expose it. I told her that was ridiculous, reckless, and dangerous. The husband then came over and wanted to fight me for insulting his wife. And not 30 seconds into his tirade, the 14 and 17-year-old drilled directly into a large electrical line, which pops the transformer and sounds like an explosion. As I was walking away, the father went from wanting to fight me to chasing his 17-year-old around with a retention pond. The mom was begging me not to leave. Nope. I was unemployed for a couple months and started applying for pretty much any job I could do. This one was a basic small biz IT support contractor. The employee the interviewer introduced to me mouthed "run" when he turned his back. That was enough for me. Shout out to the employee though for giving you the warning. For me, it's when I was cold calling people about injury claims. Have you been injured in the past 3 years? That kind of thing. The thing that really irked me was that all of the people I called in those 20 minutes were polite, said they're not interested, and they were just sitting down for dinner. I quickly realized it was a horrible job, and I was in no way cut out for it. I left after 20 minutes and just walked out the door without a word. I went to my orientation at a boot factory. They're government contracted and so pay minimum wage. So I figured I'd work there a while and look for something better. After we do the usual paperwork signing and such, we're taken as a group onto the factory floor for a tour. It's hot, it's crowded, it stinks, and everyone working looks annoyed by our presence. Okay, I guess not everyone loves their job, right? No biggie. I'm sure this won't be so bad. Then our guide informs us in no uncertain terms that our coworkers quite often give new people bad information to get them in trouble or to make them mess up. They'd even be the ones to rat you out. Then we were told our foreman is the type to yell for no reason, ask people if they're drunk in an accusatory way for no reason, and is generally a giant jerk. I took a few moments to think after these last revelations and said, nah, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. Screw that, Captain. I'm not putting up with all that for $8 and some change an hour. I work as a nanny, but when I first got into childcare, I was just babysitting. So it was my first night babysitting for this one family. Things went well, changed some diapers, put the baby to sleep, and that was about it. The parents come home and are very drunk. They asked me to stay for a little while after they got back, which was weird. Then they offered me, a 16-year-old at the time, a drink. Feeling a little pressured, I took it and just sipped on it. Then the mom got really close to me and says I probably shouldn't be driving home after having a drink. Once again, feeling a little pressured, I was thinking about accepting. So I asked if I'd just be sleeping on the couch. I'll never forget her next words to me. She says, "Oh no, honey, you'll be going to bed with us." I noped out of there so fast. I think I ran to my car, but it was just kind of a panicked blur. I left my purse there and everything. Second day at Rue 21, and the managers plus other coworkers all went out to lunch together and left me alone in the store. I wasn't able to ring anybody up yet, and the store was packed. I just walked out. When I was 16, I had an interview at a local pizza place in a not so good part of town. I was hired, and as I was walking out, two guys came in and robbed the place. The manager gave them the money in the register and they ran out. I looked at him and he said, "You get used to it." I never went back. Yeah, I don't blame you either. If it's that frequent of an occurrence, it's definitely not a safe place to be spending a lot of your time. I had a job in a salad plant, those bags of salad mix a lot of restaurants use. I was there for 2 weeks coring lettuce. In front of a conveyor belt, 8 hours a day, pick up a head, slam it, pull the core, put it down, next. You talk to your coworkers or you plot the downfall of Western civilization. One really sweet lady had been there for 10 years. 10 years on the lettuce line. She got called into the office and was gone for about a half an hour. She said, "I won't be here tomorrow, I got promoted." I asked what she'd be doing. Cabbage! I didn't quit. I wished her well, dropped my stuff, and walked out. I feel bad about not quitting, but I was young. And, well, 10 years. That was 28 years ago. Had I stayed, I might be up to carrots by now. I sometimes wonder how my life would have been different had I stayed. And in those moments, I celebrate every decision I've ever made. I was hired as an intern manager for a local nonprofit recycling plant. This meant I would hire and train interns for this amazing work opportunity. Turns out for them, interns meant working for free, doing basically everything for the organization event and marketing-wise, while also cleaning the bathroom and taking out the trash for the whole place every week. That's actually super illegal for being way too close to slave labor. I was on contract for minimum 6 months, but I managed to get out of it after 2. I ain't risking my career for their shady business practices. I wanted something part-time when I was at uni. I applied for a position at the local cinema chain and got an interview. It was one of those high turnover places that meant if you got an interview, there was a 95% chance you got a job. The guy at the box office radioed to his manager and was told to take me to room 7. We got to room 7 and wait. And wait, and wait. About 25 minutes pass before the manager starts screaming abuse over the radio because we're not in room 2. So off to room 2 we go on the other side of the building. It's a 15-screen cinema. The manager starts trying to turn on the charm, and I basically say if that's how you treat your employees in front of a job candidate, there's no way I'm ever working for you, and ask the other guy to show me out. I'm sure it made no difference to his behavior, but it saved me a lot of potential abuse. I worked at Claire's for 1 day. At the end of the shift, she asked me to put a bucket load of tiny earring packages back on the walls. A few hours later, I finish, and apparently misplaced a few of them. So she threw all of them on the floor and said to do it again. Nope. Sounds like she just has some kind of power trip. That was completely unnecessary. It was listed as a marketing position. The guy doing the interview started showing me and the other candidate how sharp Cutco knives are. Turns out it was a pyramid scheme. The guy kept asking if I wanted to sign on to buy some knives to sell. The other candidate went to the bathroom and never returned. I felt really awkward, also needed to wait to be picked up, so I stayed for the whole thing. I once saw a Craigslist ad for a stereo salesman. I showed up to a warehouse where a bunch of dudes got into a minivan. The owner told me to go on a run and see how it is, and then talk about the job. Turns out all these guys did was lie and con. They would go up to strangers and say, "Hey man, my cousin's got this stereo, but he got arrested and I don't need it. It's worth $500, but I'll gladly sell it for $200. Then use pushy tactics to get people to go to the ATM and give them money. The system was a piece of crap off-brand, and I overheard the owner saying in bulk it only cost him $20 to buy. Yeah, I noped out of this pretty quickly. I also called the police. JCPenney. I came to work to set up shelves and things, store technician, but my boss handed me a mop and said someone lady pooped in an aisle when she didn't get her way. I handed the mop back and said I'm not hazmat certified, but he is, and noped out of there. My first day on a carpentry job when I was 22, a 20-year-old kid shot me with a nail gun from about 20 feet away. He thought it was hilarious, and so did everyone else, including the company owner. I noped right out of there. Yeah, no kidding. And I hope you called the police, cause that could have been a very serious injury. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.